Hey guys, tonight we're pulling on our warmest flannel nightgowns, perhaps adding a rather fetching tasseled nightcap, and tiptoeing back to the gaslit, sometimes rather pungent world of the 19th century. Our focus this evening, those wonderfully weird, occasionally worrying, and often utterly baffling Victorian remedies for what was then as now a surprisingly simple yet universally dreaded common cold. Imagine, if you will, a time before convenient effervescent tablets or soothing lemon honey drinks from a packet. A time when a sneeze was not just a sneeze, but a potential herald of a domestic siege involving mustard plasters, onion barricades, and concoctions that would make a modern pharmacist's hair stand on end. You'll be experiencing in a gentle, sleepy sort of way the peculiar trials and tribulations of trying to nurse a simple sniffle when medical science was still, well, let's just say it was still finding its feet, often in some rather surprising directions. Now, a little reality check for you. Your chances of actually surviving some of these Victorian cold cures without at least developing a deep skepticism towards home, doctoring a permanent aversion to the smell of boiled onions or a mild case of sheer bewilderment, are probably rather slim. The remedies in some cases were arguably more challenging than the ailment itself. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your little corner of the globe. So do drop a comment below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are seated in your rather comfortably appointed, if somewhat overstuffed, Victorian drawing room. The gasolier above casts a steady, slightly yellowish glow upon the flocked wallpaper with its dizzying pattern of intertwined ivy and melancholic-looking birds. A cheerful, crackling coal fire in the ornate cast-iron grate does its valiant best to keep the persistent evening chill at bay, though you can still feel a faint, almost imperceptible draft tickling the back of your neck, a common feature in houses of this era, no matter how many heavy velvet curtains you deploy. The air is thick with the scent of coal smoke, beeswax polish from the mahogany whatnot in the corner, and the faintest lingering aroma of the rather robust mutton stew that constituted your evening meal. The grandfather clock in the hall ticks with a slow, sonorous, and deeply reassuring rhythm, each tick a tiny, comforting anchor in the quiet sea of the evening. You are engaged in a suitably genteel and improving pastime. Perhaps you are engrossed in the latest installment of Mr. Dickens's newest serialized novel, its pages filled with improbable coincidences, heart-wrenching pathos, and characters whose names alone are a testament to a wonderfully fertile imagination. Or maybe your fingers are deftly working at a piece of intricate Berlin woolwork, a riot of vibrant, if slightly clashing colors, depicting a scene of improbable pastoral bliss, complete with a sheep that bears a startling resemblance to your Aunt Mildred after a particularly large dinner. Or perhaps you're idly flipping through a collection of stereoscope cards, marveling at three-dimensional images of far-off Swiss mountains, slightly alarming depictions of wild animals in the colonies, or even those rather risque, though heavily chaperoned scenes of domestic bliss that always seem to involve a great many doilies and some very serious-looking facial hair. Historians still debate the precise influence of such popular visual media on the shaping of Victorian sensibilities, and their often romanticized, or indeed sometimes quite bizarrely constructed views of the wider world and even their own domestic sphere. The warmth from the fires making your eyelids feel a little heavy. The ticking of the clock is a soothing drone. The world outside your heavily curtained windows, with its clatter of horse-drawn omnibuses on the cobbled streets and the distant cries of street vendors hawking their wares, feels very far away. This is your sanctuary, your bastion of Victorian domestic comfort, and it is into this scene of tranquil repose that the first unwelcome intruder makes its subtle, insidious appearance. It begins as the tiniest, almost imperceptible tickle right at the very back of your throat, just where your collar, stiff with starch, is perhaps a fraction too tight. You try to ignore it. You swallow, hoping to dislodge whatever tiny mote of dust or stray fiber might be causing the irritation. You take a delicate sip from the teacup of rapidly cooling Earl Grey that sits on the lace-covered occasional table beside your plush button-backed armchair. The tickle, however, is unimpressed by your efforts. It persists. It grows bolder. It sends out little exploratory tendrils of irritation into your nasal passages. You subtly try to sniff a discreet, well-bred sniff that you hope no one, if anyone else were present, would even notice. But the tickle is now a definite, undeniable itch, a brewing storm in your sinuses. You can feel it building, that familiar, unstoppable pressure. You reach for your lace-edged cambric handkerchief, a small square of socially mandated sniffle containment just in case. You try to turn your head away to muffle the impending explosion with a polite cough into your fist, as befits a person of your refined upbringing. But it is too late. The sneeze, when it finally erupts, is a surprisingly robust, thoroughly un-Victorian, and deeply satisfying kerchew that rattles the teacup in its saucer and possibly startles a roosting pigeon on the window ledge outside. A moment of stunned silence follows, broken only by the gentle ticking of the clock and the crackle of the fire. You dab delicately at your nose with your handkerchief. Oh dear. Oh no. Not that. That was not just a random, insignificant sneeze caused by a stray speck of snuff or an errant particle of coal dust. That had the unmistakable hallmark, the undeniable authority of a sneeze with intent. A sneeze that means business. A sneeze that is the advance guard of that most unwelcome, most persistent, and most universally dreaded of winter or spring or summer or autumn. Visitors the common cold, or as your formidable great aunt Agatha prefers to call it, with a tone that suggests it is a personal affront to the entire British Empire, a most vulgar and debilitating catarrh. A wave of weary resignation washes over you. Just when you are looking forward to a quiet evening, perhaps followed by an early night with an improving book on the moral fortitude of particularly virtuous hedgehogs, your own body has decided to betray you. The inconvenience, the discomfort, the inevitable parade of well-meaning but often rather alarming remedies that will now be pressed upon you by concerned family members, officious housekeepers, or the terrifyingly comprehensive pages of Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management and Universal Cold Annihilation. Your body's highly sensitive early warning system for imminent suffering via a succession of bizarre, home-brewed concoctions and slightly alarming topical applications has just been well and truly activated. You had noticed perhaps a slight feeling of languor earlier in the day, a certain heaviness in your limbs that you had attributed to the rather rich seed cake you consumed at tea time, or perhaps the morally uplifting but undeniably lengthy sermon you endured at church last Sunday. But now, in the harsh, uncompromising light of that explosive sneeze, these earlier subtle symptoms take on a more ominous significance. The slight chill you felt despite the fire, the faint headache lurking behind your eyes, they were not mere figments. They were the scouts, the outriders of this approaching nasal insurgency. Illness, even a seemingly trivial common cold, was not a matter to be taken lightly in the Victorian era. In a time before widespread understanding of germ theory, though ideas were certainly beginning to circulate amongst the more forward-thinking medical men, and with the ever-present fear of more serious ailments like influenza consumption or diphtheria, any sign of being unwell was cause for a certain degree of anxiety. Bad air or miasma was still widely believed to be a primary cause of disease, as were sudden chills, damp feet, or an imbalance of the bodily humors, a theory that had stubbornly persisted for centuries. A simple cold could be seen not just as an inconvenience, but as a worrying sign of a weakened constitution, a failure of personal fortitude, or perhaps even a divine judgment for some unremembered minor transgression, like enjoying that third biscuit just a little too much. The newspaper you were reading earlier, lying now discarded on the ottoman, contained a rather lengthy report on Queen Victoria's recent journey to Balmoral, and a rather stern editorial on the importance of maintaining robust national character in the face of increasing foreign competition in the manufacture of, well, something involving iron girders, if you recall correctly. It all seemed very important at the time. Now, the only thing that feels truly important is the persistent, scratchy tickle that is reasserting itself at the back of your throat, and the dawning, dreadful certainty that another sneeze is imminent. You try to take a slow, calming breath, hoping to quell the rising irritation, but it's no use. Kerchew. This one is even more emphatic than the first, accompanied by a distinct watering of the eyes. You sigh a genuinely mournful sound this time. There's no denying it now. The cold has well and truly breached your defenses. Your quiet, civilized evening is officially over, replaced by the looming prospect of sniffles, sneezes, a sore throat, and the well-intentioned, if frequently misguided, medical attentions of the Victorian age. Something you realize with a sinking heart will have to be done. And your first port of call, as always, in such domestic crises, will be to consult a reliable authoritative source of household wisdom, a veritable encyclopedia of cures, concoctions, and cautionary tales. With a sigh that seems to carry all the accumulated dust and melancholy of 1,000 forgotten addicts, you finally concede defeat to the advancing forces of the common cold. That second rather emphatic sneeze, followed by the now undeniable scratchiness in your throat and a certain watery quality to your vision, has made it perfectly clear that simply wishing it away, or dabbing delicately with a cambric handkerchief, is not going to suffice. No, this situation calls for action. It calls for wisdom. It calls for the kind of assured no-nonsense guidance that can only be found within the hallowed, densely printed pages of that formidable domestic oracle, that cornerstone of Victorian household management, the universal compendium of domestic economy, health, etiquette, and general well-being, or some equally grand and all-encompassing title. Yours is probably bound in stern, dark green, or perhaps a rather somber brown cloth, its title embossed in slightly faded gold lettering, and it occupies a place of honor or at least significant weight on the whatnot in the corner or perhaps on a dedicated shelf in the morning room, alongside other improving volumes on pressed flowers, the moral lessons to be learned from particularly industrious ants, and perhaps a slim book of rather gloomy poetry. You rise somewhat reluctantly from the plush, button backed embrace of your armchair. The serialized novel by Mr. Dickens, with its cliffhanger ending involving a missing orphan and a possibly villainous lawyer with remarkable eyebrows temporarily forgotten. The fire in the grate crackles a cheerful, almost mocking farewell as you leave its immediate circle of warmth. You retrieve the aforementioned weighty tome. It is indeed a substantial volume, its sheer physical presence exuding an air of unshakable authority. This book weighs more than a small recalcitrant badger and contains roughly the same amount of unsolicited, highly confident, and occasionally quite startling advice on almost every conceivable aspect of human existence, from how to correctly address a duke you might unexpectedly encounter on a Tuesday to the proper method for boiling an egg. A surprisingly contentious and lengthy chapter, to most pertinently, for your current predicament, the swift and certain vanquishing of catarrhal affections. You carry it back to your chair, its heft a familiar burden, and settle it carefully in your lap. The spine creaks in a distinguished, elderly sort of way as you open it, a sound that speaks of generations of previous consultations, of countless domestic crises, navigated of innumerable stains, successfully, or perhaps not so successfully removed from precious table linens. The pages are thick, slightly yellowed at the edges, and emit that unique, dry, faintly sweet aroma of old paper printer's ink, and perhaps just a hint of the lavender that great Aunt Agatha insists on tucking between the leaves of all her favorite books to ward off. Well, she's never been entirely clear what it wards off, but she's very insistent about it. Now begins the slightly daunting task of navigating the book's labyrinthine interior to find the specific section relevant to your current sniffly complaint. You might first consult the meticulously detailed table of contents, a document so extensive it could almost be a slim volume in its own right, listing chapters on the management of servants, including grievances, real and imagined, the art of polite conversation with approved topics for mixed company, economical soups for the deserving poor, and needlework, plain and ornamental. Or perhaps you turn directly to the index at the back, a dense forest of tiny print, where you scan for suitable keywords. Ague, biliousness, consumption prevention and palliation of delirium, earache. The list of potential human miseries is impressively, if somewhat depressingly, long. Ah, here we are, catarrh, common causes and cure of, or perhaps it's listed under influenza, mild forms of, or even the rather charmingly vague affections of the head and chest. The Victorians, you reflect, had a remarkable talent for giving even the most mundane ailment a rather grand and serious sounding name. Having located a relevant chapter, you begin to read, your finger tracing the lines of dense, closely packed text. The tone is one of unwavering confidence, the advice delivered with the stern assurance of a field marshal outlining a battle plan. There are no tentative suggestions here. No, you might try this if you feel up to it. It is all brisk, prescriptive, and occasionally quite alarming. The actual efficacy of many of the myriad remedies listed in these popular Victorian household management books for common ailments like the cold versus their purely psychological or perhaps even significant placebo effect, or indeed the undeniable impact of the accompanying sensible advice that often included rest, warmth, and simple nourishment is a fascinating and ongoing area of study for medical historians and those interested in the social history of medicine. You, however, are not currently in a position to conduct a detached, scholarly analysis. You're in a position of needing to stop sneezing quite so explosively before you inadvertently extinguish the gas leer. The remedies proposed are varied. Some seem relatively benign, echoing the timeless wisdom of grandmothers throughout the ages. A warm gruel, taken upon retiring to bed. The inhalation of steam from a jug of boiling water to which a few drops of friar's balsam may be added, or the wearing of a flannel next to the skin to promote a healthy perspiration. Sensible enough, you suppose, if a little unexciting. But then, the advice takes a more adventurous and occasionally rather pungent turn. You read of a poultice of bread and milk applied warm to the throat, the sipping of blackcurrant tea infused with a small knob of clarified mutton sweet for its emollient properties, or the application of warmed goose grease to the soles of the feet, followed by the wearing of thick woolen stockings in bed to draw out the humors. You encounter suggestions for gargles involving everything from sage tea and honey, quite pleasant probably, to solutions of borax diluted carbolic acid, rather less pleasant, you imagine, or even in one particularly enthusiastic entry, a stimulating wash for the back of the throat, composed of 20 drops of spirits of hartshorn in a wineglass of cold water. Spirits of hartshorn, you vaguely recall, is essentially ammonia. The thought of gargling with ammonia makes your eyes water almost as much as your last sneeze did. Interspersed with these medicinal suggestions are often snippets of advice on completely unrelated, though equally vital aspects of Victorian life. A paragraph on the best way to brew a strengthening posset for an invalid might be immediately followed by detailed instructions on the proper method for cleaning kid gloves using breadcrumbs and magnesia, or how to comport oneself with dignity when faced with an impertinent omnibus conductor. This book, you reflect, truly aims to be your one-stop shop for navigating every conceivable earthly trial from a head cold to a social snub. It's a bit like those modern internet forums, but bound in leather and smelling faintly of your great Aunt Agatha's lavender. You turn a page, the thick paper rustling softly, and your eye is caught by a heading, "For a stubborn cold in the chest, the mustard plaster." The description that follows is both compelling and slightly terrifying. It speaks of drawing out the inflammation, of promoting a healthy counter-irritation, and of speedily relieving tightness and congestion. It involves mixing strong mustard powder with flour and warm water to form a thick paste, spreading this fiery concoction onto a piece of linen or brown paper, and then applying it directly to the afflicted chest or back, leaving it in place until a decided sensation of warmth and redness is achieved. The instructions sternly warn against leaving it on for too long, lest blistering occur. A cheerful little addendum that does little to soothe your growing apprehension. Yet the book speaks of its efficacy with such unwavering conviction, such assured authority. Perhaps this is it. Perhaps this is the robust, no nonsense Victorian remedy your incipient cold requires. It certainly sounds invigorating, and anything surely is better than succumbing to a prolonged period of sniffling, sneezing, and general misery that might cause you to miss Mrs. Peabody's upcoming afternoon tea, where she is rumored to be unveiling a new and particularly scandalous type of biscuit. The stakes are high. With a mixture of trepidation and a desperate sort of hope, you mark the page detailing the construction and application of the mustard plaster. It seems a suitably Victorian course of action, slightly alarming, rather hands on, and promising dramatic, if not entirely comfortable results. Decision made. The pronouncements within the Universal Compendium of Domestic Economy, Health Etiquette, and General Well-Being regarding the formidable efficacy of the mustard plaster have swayed you. It sounds suitably dramatic, impressively medicinal, and possessed of a certain no-nonsense Victorian vigor that appeals to your current desire for swift and decisive action against this encroaching catarrhal foe. Mere gentle steam inhalations and soothing gruels seem far too passive for the current level of nasal and pharyngeal irritation you're experiencing. No, what is required clearly is a direct, fiery assault upon the very seat of the affliction, your chest, or possibly your back. The book was a little vague on the optimal geographical location for this particular form of domestic warfare, but the chest seems like a good accessible starting point. With a sigh that is now less about dusty attics and more about a dawning trepidation, you rise once more from your armchair, carefully placing the weighty household manual, still open to the page detailing plaster's mustard application of for stubborn congestions, onto the cluttered occasional table. You make your way perhaps with a slight new stiffness in your limbs that you attribute to the insidious onset of your cold towards the kitchen or the scullery, the domain where such alchemical preparations are usually undertaken. The gaslight in the hallway hums softly, casting a pale, unwavering glow on the patterned linoleum. Your first task is to assemble the necessary ingredients and apparatus. From the dark recesses of the pantry, you retrieve a squat, sturdy tin labeled Keen's Genuine Double Superfine Mustard Powder, warranted pure. The very name sounds vaguely explosive. The tin itself is a cheerful bright yellow, adorned with impressive-looking medals and royal warrants, all attesting to its unparalleled pungency and general mustardy excellence. You also procure a quantity of plain household flour. Not your finest sifted cake flour, of course, just the everyday sort used for thickening stews or dusting unfortunate fish before their fiery demise in the frying pan. A clean earthenware bowl, a sturdy wooden spoon, a cup of lukewarm water, and a suitable piece of old clean linen, perhaps from a worn-out chemise or a repurposed napkin, complete your arsenal. You're basically preparing to turn your chest into a human hot dog. Hold the actual hot dog, add extra mustard. You measure out the mustard powder into the bowl, or rather, you guesstimate a suitable quantity, as Victorian domestic recipes often relied more on a good handful or sufficient to the purpose than on precise scientific measurements. The bright yellow powder releases a surprisingly potent, sharp, almost eye-watering aroma as you spoon it out, a tiny sneeze-inducing cloud that makes you blink rapidly. This stuff, you can already tell, means business. You add a roughly equal amount of flour which the book assures you is to temper the fierceness of the mustard and prevent undue blistering of the tender skin, a thoughtful, if slightly alarming precaution. Then you slowly add the lukewarm water, stirring with the wooden spoon until you achieve a thick, smooth, spreadable paste, roughly the consistency of good, thick porridge, or perhaps a particularly uncooperative swamp mud. The color is an intense, almost aggressive, yolky yellow, and the smell is now filling your small kitchen preparation area with a sinus clearing pungency that could probably awaken a hibernating bear, or at the very least signal to everyone within a 3-street radius that someone is about to engage in some serious Victorian home doctoring. Your eyes are definitely watering now. Once the paste is mixed to your, or rather the book's satisfaction, you spread it evenly onto the piece of old linen, leaving a small margin around the edges as per the instructions. You try to make the layer reasonably thick, but not so thick that it will simply slide off in a messy yellow avalanche when applied. The resulting object looks rather like a large, floppy, mustard yellow biscuit, albeit one you would be extremely unwise to attempt to eat. Some practitioners you recall reading advocate warming the cloth slightly before applying the paste to make the initial contact less of a shock to the system. You decide against this added refinement. You are feeling brave, or perhaps just increasingly desperate. Now comes the moment of truth. You return to your drawing room, or perhaps you decide that the relative privacy and proximity to a washstand in your bedchamber might be a more strategic location for this particular endeavor. You loosen your high-necked collar and unbutton the top few buttons of your waistcoat and shirt, exposing your chest to the cool air of the room. Taking a deep, steadying breath, which is immediately followed by a slight coughing fit as the mustard fumes hit the back of your throat, you take up the prepared plaster. It feels cool and slightly damp through the linen. With a certain grim determination, you apply it paste side down directly to your chest. The initial sensation is one of surprising coolness. The damp linen, a brief, almost pleasant contrast to your already slightly feverish skin. This lasts for approximately 3 seconds. Then a new sensation begins to assert itself: warmth. A gentle, spreading warmth, at first like a comforting hot water bottle. Ah, you think this isn't so bad. Rather soothing, in fact. This comforting thought lasts for approximately another 10 seconds. The warmth then rapidly escalates, transitioning from gentle and spreading to quite noticeable and tingly, and then with alarming speed into distinctly hot and rather prickly. The Victorians believed firmly in the principle of counter-irritation, the idea that by creating a superficial irritation on the skin, you could draw out deeper inflammations or congestions from within the body. Whether the counter-irritant theory that underpinned the widespread use of remedies like these mustard plasters held any direct scientifically verifiable physiological benefit for actual respiratory ailments beyond temporarily increasing superficial blood flow to the area and acting as a potent sensory distraction from the cold's primary symptoms, or if its perceived effectiveness was largely due to this powerful distraction and the significant placebo effect of undergoing such a dramatic and rather assertive form of treatment, is still considered and explored by medical historians and physiologists. You, at this moment, are less concerned with the precise scientific mechanism and more concerned with the fact that your chest feels as though it is being gently but firmly toasted over a slow fire. The heat intensifies. It is no longer just hot. It is stinging, burning 1,000 tiny fiery needles, pricking at your skin. The smell of mustard is now overwhelming, filling your nostrils, making your eyes stream. You try to breathe deeply and calmly, as recommended by the Universal Compendium. But each inhalation seems to draw the pungent fumes further into your lungs, inducing fresh paroxysms of coughing. This isn't just a remedy, it's a full frontal sensory assault, a declaration of chemical warfare on your own person in the name of supposed wellness. On the bright side, your sinuses, which were feeling rather congested a few minutes ago, are now clearer than they have been in years. Your skin, however, is currently lodging a very loud, very red, and increasingly urgent formal complaint. The instructions in the book stated to leave the plaster in place for 10 to 15 minutes, or until a decided redness and sensation of heat is well established, but not so long as to produce actual blistering, which is to be avoided. You glance at the grandfather clock in the hall, its steady ticking now sounding like a countdown to either miraculous recovery or spontaneous combustion. Each minute stretches into an eternity. The stinging sensation becomes a steady, throbbing burn. You can feel your pulse quickening. You try to distract yourself by thinking of pleasant things. The Queen's upcoming Jubilee celebrations, perhaps, or that charming new breed of fern that is all the rage in horticultural circles, or even the plot of Mr. Dickens's novel. But the sheer insistent reality of the burning mustard on your chest makes all such mental excursions impossible. Different households and indeed different editions of these popular medical guides sometimes recommended varying strengths of mustard for different ages or sensitivities. A child or person of delicate constitution would receive a much milder plaster with a greater proportion of flour to mustard. For a robust adult suffering from a stubborn congestion, however, a full-strength application was often deemed necessary. You appear to be currently experiencing the full, unadulterated 5-alarm fire strength. There was even a belief that the hotter the plaster felt, the more good it was doing, the more effectively it was drawing out the noxious humors or stimulating the vital forces. Right now, your vital forces feel less stimulated and more aggressively under siege. Finally, after what feels like several geological epochs, but is probably only the prescribed 15 minutes, you decide you have achieved a decided redness and a sensation of heat that is rapidly approaching actual self-immolation. With a gasp of relief, you carefully peel the mustard plaster from your skin. The linen comes away with a soft, squelching sound, leaving behind a perfect bright red rectangular outline on your chest, like a rather alarming abstract painting. The skin tingles, stings, and radiates an incredible heat. It is indeed very, very red. You gently wipe away any remaining mustard paste with a damp cloth. The coolness of the water a momentary exquisite relief, quickly followed by a renewed wave of stinging as the air hits your sensitized skin. You stand there for a moment, breathing deeply, your chest glowing like a sunset, feeling a strange mixture of pain, relief that the ordeal is over, and a peculiar sort of triumph. Surely you think, surely something that feels this dramatic, this powerful, this painful must have done some good. The cold in your chest, if it had any sense at all, would be packing its bags and fleeing in terror from such a fiery, determined counterattack. As your skin slowly begins to cool, or at least to stop feeling like it's actively on fire, your thoughts, still slightly muddled by the mustard fumes, turn to the next phase of your domestic health campaign. With your chest now theoretically cleared by the poultice's potent magic, perhaps it is time to address the very air you breathe to ensure its purity and freedom from any lingering catarrhal miasmas. Your chest still radiates a surprising, almost aggressive warmth from its recent encounter with the mustard plaster, a fiery testament to your commitment to Victorian self-medication. The skin is a rather alarming shade of crimson, and it tingles with a persistent prickly sensation, as if 1,000 tiny invisible imps are engaged in a vigorous Morris dance upon your sternum. But beneath the lingering sting, there is also a strange, almost satisfying feeling, a conviction that such a potent remedy must have dislodged some deep-seated chill, some lurking miasma of ill health. You feel, if not precisely better, then at least thoroughly and impressively doctored. And now, with your internal humors theoretically rebalanced by external counter-irritation, your thoughts still slightly perfumed with the lingering ghost of mustard fumes, turn to the very air that surrounds you, the air within your soon-to-be sick room, your bedchamber. It too, according to the wisdom of the Universal Compendium, and indeed the firm convictions of your great Aunt Agatha, must be purified, cleansed of any lingering noxious vapors or airborne contagions that might seek to prolong your suffering, or, heaven forbid, spread it to other currently less afflicted members of the household. And for this particular task of atmospheric ablution, the Victorian domestic arsenal contains another surprisingly pungent, if rather common weapon, the humble onion. Yes, the same tear-inducing bulb that brings such robust flavor to your stews and gravies is also believed to possess remarkable properties as an aerial purifier, a silent, unassuming sentinel against the invisible enemies of ill health. The theory, as you understand it from various household guides and whispered village wisdom, is that a sliced raw onion left exposed in a room will somehow absorb or neutralize any harmful miasmas, those ill-defined disease-carrying effluvia that were thought to rise from damp, ground-decaying matter, or even the breath of the unwell. The persistence of these miasmatic theories of disease transmission throughout much of the 19th century, even as early iterations of what would become germ theory, were beginning to gain some tentative scientific traction among the more forward-thinking medical men, and the profound influence these older, deeply ingrained beliefs had on everyday domestic sanitation, preventative health practices, and the perceived efficacy of remedies, like placing onions in a sickroom, is a complex and utterly fascinating area of social and medical historical study. For you, however, it's less about scholarly debate and more about doing whatever the compendium confidently asserts will get you back to reading Mr. Dickens in peace. So with a sigh that is now less about trepidation and more about a weary acceptance of the aromatic sacrifices required for Victorian wellness, you make your way once more to the kitchen or the larder. You select a few good-sized onions, firm and papery skinned, perhaps one of those robust Spanish onions, known for their particularly assertive character, or maybe just the common brown variety that forms the backbone of your household's culinary endeavors. You carry them along with a sharp knife and a couple of clean earthenware saucers up the creaking stairs to your bedchamber. Your bedchamber, when you enter it, feels cool, perhaps a little damp, especially if the windows have been left ajar earlier in the day, for that all-important, if somewhat bracing, Victorian ventilation. The heavy velvet curtains are drawn against the night, and a single oil lamp turned low casts a soft, flickering glow over the familiar landscape of your four-poster bed, with its voluminous draperies, the imposing mahogany wardrobe that smells faintly of lavender and mothballs, and the cluttered dressing table with its array of mysterious bottles and silver-backed brushes. It is, or was, a haven of anticipated repose. It is about to become significantly more fragrant. You place one of the saucers on your bedside table, another, perhaps, on the mantelpiece, over the currently unlit fireplace, and maybe a third on the washstand in the corner for good measure. Then you take the first onion and with your sharp knife begin to slice it into thick, translucent rings. The effect is immediate and predictable. The pungent sulfurous compounds within the onion are released into the air with an almost explosive intensity, and your eyes, already sensitized by the earlier mustard fumes and the general onset of your cold, begin to water profusely. It's like chopping onions for a very large, very invisible stew, only the only thing simmering is your own growing sense of olfactory martyrdom. Your bedroom now has the distinct and arguably less than romantic alluring aroma of a recently ransacked greengrocer's stall, or perhaps a forgotten salad that has decided to stage a very pungent, very tear-inducing protest. Undeterred or perhaps simply resigned to your fate, you distribute the sliced onion rings onto the saucers, creating little pungent altars to domestic hygiene around the room. Each slice gleams wetly in the lamplight, its concentric circles, a miniature fragrant target for any passing miasma. You try to breathe shallowly through your mouth to minimize the direct assault on your nostrils, but the onion's pervasive aroma is not so easily thwarted. It fills the room a thick, inescapable, eye-stinging fog. You're pretty sure that if a genuinely noxious miasma did try to float into your bedchamber now, it would take one deep sniff of this formidable oniony barricade, promptly turn around and make a very hasty retreat to find a less aggressively perfumed sick room to infect. The onions aren't just purifying the air. They're also acting as a highly effective, if somewhat unsociable deterrent against any unwanted visitors, human spectral or microbial. There are, of course, variations on this theme. Some authorities suggest placing a whole peeled onion under the bed of the sufferer, where it is believed to draw the sickness downwards and into itself. Others recommend hanging strings of onions around the room like rather fragrant if unconventional festive decorations. There was even a belief in some rural communities that a specific, particularly potent, locally grown variety of wild garlic, if available, could be used in a similar fashion, though this would likely render the sick room entirely uninhabitable to anyone possessing a functioning sense of smell for several days, if not weeks. You stick with the sliced onions on saucers as per the more mainstream advice in the compendium. It feels quite dramatic enough. Victorian cities with their coal smoke, their burgeoning industries, their often rudimentary sanitation systems, and their overcrowded tenements frequently suffered from significant air quality problems. This constant exposure to bad air undoubtedly contributed to the widespread concern about miasmas and the various domestic practices aimed at purifying indoor environments. Besides the strategic deployment of onions, households might regularly burn vinegar in a heated shovel to fumigate rooms, leave out bowls of chloride of lime, or frequently employ smelling salts and aromatic spirits, not just to revive swooning ladies, but also as a personal portable defense against the noxious effluvia encountered in public spaces. Your current onion-based air filtration system is simply a more domestic and arguably more tear-inducing application of this broader societal concern. You stand for a moment in the center of your now powerfully aromatic bedchamber tears, streaming freely down your face, trying to convince yourself that this is all for the best. The air certainly feels different, sharper perhaps, more invigorating. Or maybe that's just the effect of having one's sinuses aggressively scoured by raw onion fumes. You recall reading that some people believed the onions would visibly darken or even turn black if they successfully absorbed a particularly virulent illness from the room, a rather alarming prospect that you hope not to witness firsthand. For now, they remain their pristine, pungent white and pale purple. Your chest still tingles from the mustard plaster, a dull, persistent, fiery glow beneath your nightshirt. Your eyes are now streaming from the onions. Your nose paradoxically feels remarkably clear, almost as if the sheer shock of the combined mustard and onion assault has frightened the nascent congestion into a temporary retreat. This, you tell yourself, is progress. This is Victorian science in action. This is the path to wellness, paved with good intentions and an astonishing quantity of aggressively scented vegetables. However, despite the potentially purified air and the theoretically drawn-out chest congestion, that persistent scratchy tickle at the very back of your throat remains. It's a stubborn little irritation, a defiant survivor of your recent chemical onslaught. Clearly, a more direct approach to this particular symptom is now warranted. Your thoughts navigating through the fragrant haze begin to turn towards the next logical step in your comprehensive cold-fighting campaign. A bracing cleansing and no doubt entirely delightful gargle. The overpowering aroma of sliced raw onions now thoroughly perfumes your bedchamber, a pungent testament to your dedication to Victorian atmospheric purification. Your eyes, which were already streaming from the initial slicing ceremony, have achieved a state of permanent, if slightly mournful, wateriness. Your sinuses, it must be said, feel remarkably, almost unnervingly clear, as if a tiny, very determined chimney sweep, armed with a miniature onion-scented brush, has just completed a thorough scouring of your entire nasal passage. However, despite this aggressive olfactory intervention and the lingering fiery memory of the mustard plaster still tingling on your chest, that irritating, scratchy, ticklish sensation at the very back of your throat persists. It's a stubborn little blighter, a tiny defiant outpost of the encroaching cold that refuses to yield to mere fumes or distant counter-irritants. Clearly, a more direct, more targeted assault upon this pharyngeal foe is required. Your thoughts navigating through the tear-inducing onion fog drift back to the wisdom contained within. The universal compendium of domestic economy, health etiquette, and general well-being. Surely amongst its densely printed pages, detailing everything from the proper way to address a vice count to the most efficient method for removing stubborn ink stains from a Brussels carpet. There must be a section dedicated to efficacious gargles for a troublesome tickling in the throat. You retrieve the weighty tome once more, its familiar heft a comforting presence, and begin your quest. After a brief but determined skirmish, with the index under G for gargles various, S for soreness of the throat common, or perhaps even T for tickling sensations, unpleasant relief of you locate a promising entry. The recipe that catches your eye, or rather makes your already watery eyes widen a fraction further, is one that speaks of vigor, of potency, of a certain robust, no nonsense approach to throat clearing. It calls for a pleasingly simple yet undeniably alarming combination of ingredients, a generous pinch of finest red cayenne pepper, the very same fiery powder that adds such a surprising kick to your cook's renowned mulligatawny soup, a spoonful of sharp cider vinegar, a dash of common table salt, all to be dissolved in a small cup of water warmed to a tolerable heat. The instructions assure you that this concoction, when gargled with due diligence and fortitude, will speedily cut the phlegm, reduce inflammation, and impart a most beneficial warmth and stimulation to the affected parts. It sounds less like a soothing balm and more like a declaration of war upon your tonsils. This isn't just a gargle, it's a dare. A dare your throat is currently looking at with considerable apprehension. The Victorian penchant for what might be termed heroic medical treatments, characterized by aggressive interventions and the administration of potent, often quite harsh substances, even for relatively minor self-limiting ailments like a common cold, and whether this stemmed primarily from a deeply ingrained cultural desire for perceptible, immediate physiological effects. The popular, if it feels truly awful, it must surely be working school of medical thought, or from a more complex interplay of prevailing humoral theories, patient expectation, and the limited availability of genuinely effective and gentler alternatives, is often discussed with a mixture of fascination and faint horror by social historians of medicine. You at this moment are about to become a very personal case study in this phenomenon, with a sigh that carries a hint of both resignation and a strange perverse curiosity. You gather your ingredients. The cayenne pepper, a vibrant, angry red, sits in its small tin, radiating an almost visible aura of fiery potential. The vinegar sourced from the cool darkness of the pantry smells sharp and acidic, a scent that normally makes your mouth water in anticipation of pickled onions, but now just makes your throat constrict preemptively. You measure a small quantity of warm water into a sturdy glass, add a pinch of salt, a splash of the vinegar, its pungent aroma immediately dueling with the already dominant onion scent in the room, creating a truly unique olfactory signature that you're sure no perfumer has ever attempted to bottle. And then with a deep breath, you add the cayenne pepper. The red powder swirls into the water, creating a rather alarming, murky, orangish liquid that looks less like a medicinal gargle and more like something you might use to strip old varnish from a particularly stubborn piece of furniture, or perhaps to deter a regiment of particularly determined burglars. You contemplate the mixture for a moment. It does not look inviting. It does not smell inviting. In fact, every sensible instinct in your body is currently screaming at you to pour it discreetly into the nearest potted fern, though you suspect even the fern might lodge a formal complaint. But the book promised beneficial warmth and stimulation, and your throat is undeniably scratchy. And Mrs. Peabody's tea party with the scandalous biscuits is only a few days away. Fortitude, the book said. Fortitude. Taking another deep breath and perhaps offering a small silent apology to your soon-to-be assaulted esophagus, you take a cautious mouthful of the fiery concoction. For a split second, there is nothing. Just the warmth of the water, the slight saltiness, the sour tang of the vinegar. And then the cayenne hits. It is not a gentle warmth. It is not a stimulating tingle. It is an immediate, explosive, all-consuming inferno. Your entire mouth, tongue, and throat are instantly engulfed in a searing volcanic heat that makes the earlier mustard plaster feel like a gentle, cooling balm by comparison. Your eyes, already watery from the onions, now spring open to their widest possible diameter, tears gushing forth as if from tiny, overpressured fountains. A strangled gasp escapes you. The thought of actually gargling this liquid, of voluntarily agitating it around the already tender and inflamed tissues at the back of your throat, suddenly seems like an act of profound and terrifying madness. The recipe probably had a very small, almost invisible footnote. May cause spontaneous human combustion and a lifelong fear of pepper. Use with extreme gusto and a nearby bucket of cold water. You manage through sheer desperate reflex to perform a sort of abortive convulsive gurgle before an uncontrollable coughing fit seizes you. You splutter, you choke, you gasp for air, bending over as your body tries to expel the fiery invader. A small amount of the peppery liquid might escape your lips, landing with a sizzle on your nightshirt, where it will no doubt leave a rather interesting orange stain. Your throat now feels as though it has been personally scoured by a very angry dragon, who then rinsed thoroughly with molten lava. The beneficial warmth promised by the book feels suspiciously like a third-degree burn. After what seems like an eternity of coughing, spluttering, and frantic fanning of your mouth with your hand, the initial fiery shock begins to subside, replaced by a throbbing, raw, and intensely tingling sensation. Your tongue feels 3 sizes too large. Your throat feels, well, it certainly doesn't feel ticklish anymore. It mostly just feels comprehensively abused. You take a tentative sip of cool water from the carafe by your bed, and even that feels like an adventure. Yet as the immediate agony fades to a dull, persistent burn, a strange thought occurs to you. Your throat, while undeniably raw, also feels strangely clear, almost numb in places. Perhaps there was something to this heroic approach after all. Or perhaps your nerve endings have simply gone on strike in protest. There was a peculiar belief in some circles that the more violently a medicine made you react, the more you coughed, spluttered, sweated, or otherwise demonstrated a robust physiological response, the more effectively it was expelling the noxious humors or combating the invading malady. By that measure, your recent gargling performance was an unparalleled triumph of therapeutic efficacy. You eye the remaining orange liquid in the glass with a mixture of respect and profound fear. The book probably recommended repeating the gargle several times a day. You make a mental note to perhaps misplace that particular page later. For now, your throat feels as though it has endured quite enough beneficial stimulation to last it for a considerable time. It is scoured, yes, inflamed almost certainly, But the tickle for this brief post-volcanic moment seems to have been temporarily silenced or perhaps just intimidated into submission. You sit on the edge of your bed, breathing carefully, acutely aware of the lingering, fiery tingle. The room still smells overwhelmingly of onions now, with an added top note of aggressive cayenne and sharp vinegar. It's a truly unique potpourri of suffering. While your throat may have been subjected to a rather brutal form of shock therapy, you feel a deep systemic weariness still clinging to you. The cold, it seems, is not a foe to be vanquished by surface assaults alone. Perhaps you think what is needed now is something more internal, something nourishing, something to build up your strength from within, to fortify your very constitution against this lingering malaise. Even if that something comes in a glistening amber bottle and carries with it its own set of rather well documented and universally dreaded challenges, your throat throbs with a dull, persistent ache, a legacy of its recent fiery baptism by cayenne and vinegar. While the immediate volcanic stinging has subsided, a tender, raw sensibility remains a constant reminder of your valiant, if somewhat brutal, efforts to cut the phlegm and reduce inflammation. The air in your bedchamber, still thick with the combined aromatic forces of militant onions and aggressive pickling agents, does little to soothe it. You feel deep within your weary bones a profound need for something more than just localized assaults on your various afflicted parts. What is required now? You decide with a sigh that tastes faintly of residual pepper, is internal fortification, a strengthening of your very constitution from the inside out, a way to build up your vital forces to repel this lingering catarrhal invader. And in the grand Victorian pharmacopoeia of fortifying tonics, one reigns supreme in its reputation for robust, if rather challenging efficacy, the dreaded yet revered cod liver oil. You locate the dark brown, almost opaque glass bottle on a cool shelf in the medicine cupboard. Or perhaps it's kept in the larder, away from the corrupting influence of sunlight. Its label adorned with a rather stoic-looking codfish, and a great deal of reassuringly dense, small print, attesting to its purity, potency, and unsurpassed restorative virtues, does little to alleviate the sense of impending doom that the mere sight of this bottle always inspires. This isn't just oil. It's a liquid endurance test, a daily trial by spoonful, often recommended by physicians and sternly endorsed by matriarchs, for a host of ailments from weak chests and persistent coughs to general debility, rickets in children, and as a preventative against the dreaded consumption. The actual extent of the direct immunological benefits of Victorian-era cod liver oil for common ailments like a simple cold, beyond its now well-understood provision of essential vitamins A and D, which were often sorely deficient in the typical urban diet of the period, especially during the long, sunless winter months, and precisely how much of its widespread reputation was built on its general observed tonic effects in combating deficiency diseases, compelling physician endorsements based on empirical observation, or simply its formidable and unforgettably challenging character continues to be examined by medical historians and nutritionists. You, however, are less concerned with its precise scientific action and more with its well-documented ability to make you shudder involuntarily. With a sigh that seems to carry the collective reluctance of generations forced to endure this particular remedy, you retrieve the bottle and a sturdy, uncompromising-looking tablespoon. perhaps one specifically designated for this very purpose. A spoon that has witnessed untold horrors and bears the faint, lingering aroma of 1,000 past fishy encounters. You uncork the bottle. The smell that wafts forth is distinctive. It is an olfactory experience that once encountered is never ever forgotten. It is a potent, complex bouquet of old fish stale oil and a faint underlying hint of something vaguely metallic and deeply unsettling. It does not whisper of sunny meadows or fragrant herb gardens. It bellows in a rather oily baritone of the cold, dark depths of the North Atlantic and the internal workings of a very large, very deceased cod. You pour a spoonful of the glistening amber-colored liquid. It is thick, viscous, clinging to the spoon with a stubborn reluctance, its surface catching the lamplight with a heavy, oily sheen. It looks less like medicine and more like something you might use to lubricate a particularly rusty gate hinge or perhaps to waterproof a very small, very unfortunate boat. The spoon approaches your mouth with the cheerful, unhurried inevitability of a particularly dour tax collector coming to claim his due. You close your eyes for a moment, steeling yourself, perhaps offering a brief, silent prayer to any household deity who might be listening and feeling particularly merciful. Then, with a deep breath held tightly in your chest, you take the plunge. The oil enters your mouth, a heavy cloying wave of profound fishiness. The texture is an experience in itself. Thick, smooth, almost syrupy, coating your tongue, your teeth, the roof of your mouth, and your already aggrieved throat with an unwelcome, inescapable film. The taste is, well, it tastes exactly like it smells, only somehow more so. It's an intense, deeply pissing flavor, a concentrated essence of the sea, but not the pleasant, breezy, seaside holiday kind of sea. More the bottom of a forgotten fishing trawler's bilge pump kind of sea. Your taste buds, which were just beginning to recover from the cayenne pepper incident, are now officially submitting their formal written resignation, citing extreme and repeated piscine trauma as grounds for immediate and permanent retirement. You try to swallow it quickly to get the ordeal over with, but its very viscosity seems to fight against a hasty departure, clinging tenaciously to every available surface. A small involuntary shudder racks your frame as it finally makes its slow, oily descent down your esophagus. And then comes the aftertaste. Oh, the aftertaste. It is a lingering, ghostly echo of the initial horror, a persistent, oily, fishy phantom that takes up residence at the back of your throat and refuses all polite and indeed not so polite requests to leave. It has its own postcode, this aftertaste, and it clearly plans to stay for the entire weekend, possibly inviting a few equally unwelcome relatives over for a prolonged visit. Many Victorians faced with this daily ordeal developed elaborate strategies to try and mitigate the unpleasantness. Some would immediately follow their dose with a lump of sugar, a piece of dry bread, or a sip of strong tea or coffee, hoping to overwhelm the lingering fishiness. Others swore by holding their nose, whilst swallowing, a technique of dubious efficacy, but popular nonetheless. Children were often cajoled, bribed, or simply held down and forcibly administered their strengthening medicine. You might recall your own childhood encounters with the dreaded bottle and the way your mother would try to disguise it in a spoonful of treacle or jam, a strategy that usually only resulted in making both the cod liver oil and the jam taste vaguely horrifying. Some brands of cod liver oil were even marketed as palatable or tasteless, often with the addition of peppermint wintergreen or even orange peel essence. But these flavorings usually only succeeded in creating a new, even more bizarre and deeply unsettling taste. Sensation minty fish oil or oily orange fish. The fundamental fishiness, it seemed, was indomitable. Yet, despite its universally acknowledged unpleasantness, cod liver oil was consumed with a kind of grim determination by millions. Its reputation as a powerful restorative, a builder of strength, a guardian against the ravages of winter and disease, was deeply ingrained. It was seen as a small price to pay for robust health, a necessary evil in the ongoing battle against frailty and illness. And so you too endure it because the Universal Compendium recommends it, because your physician, if you had consulted one for such a triviality as a cold, would almost certainly have prescribed it, and because deep down in that Victorian part of your soul that believes suffering is probably quite good for the character, you hope that anything this profoundly disagreeable must be doing you some good. You carefully wipe the spoon and recork the bottle, returning it to its shadowy shelf, with a sense of having successfully navigated yet another perilous trial. Your throat is now thoroughly coated in a protective, if unpleasantly flavored film. You feel fortified, perhaps, or maybe just thoroughly oiled. The lingering taste is a constant, unwelcome companion, a fishy ghost at the feast of your recovery. You try to distract yourself by thinking of other things, but every now and then, a small, oily eructation will bring the full, horrifying memory of its flavor flooding back. Still, you have done your duty by your constitution. You have faced the amber horror and swallowed it down. Now, with your internal defenses theoretically bolstered by the potent virtues of the cod, you find yourself craving anything to take that lingering, ghastly taste away. Or perhaps a different kind of draught, one from the chemist's shop, perhaps one that promises relief, not through fishy fortitude, but through some more mysterious and hopefully more palatable curative elixir. The lingering aftertaste of the cod liver oil, a stubborn, oily piscine ghost, haunting the back of your throat, serves as a persistent, unwelcome reminder of your recent act of constitutional fortitude. While you tell yourself that its unsurpassed restorative virtues are even now coursing through your system, building you up from within, what you mostly feel is a profound desire for anything, to eradicate that ghastly flavor and perhaps offer a more immediate and ideally more palatable form of relief from the tickle in your throat and the general weariness that still clings to you like a damp woolen shawl. Your thoughts therefore turn from the bracing horrors of the natural larder to the more sophisticated, if often equally mysterious, offerings of the local chemist. Surely Mr. Pettigrew, with his impressive array of gleaming glass bottles, porcelain jars, and air of quiet scientific authority, will have just the thing: a curative draught, an elixir, a cordial something to soothe, to calm, to banish this lingering catarrhal malaise. You recall a small dark green bottle tucked away in the medicine cupboard, procured some weeks ago on just such an occasion, or perhaps recommended by a well-meaning neighbor who swore by its efficacy. It bears an impressively ornate label, printed in the elaborate Gothic script, with flourishes of faded gold, proclaiming it to be Dr. Throckmorton's celebrated lung tonic and catarrh cordial, a sovereign remedy for affections of the chest throat and bronchial passages. Endorsed by physicians of repute and gratefully received by sufferers throughout the civilized world. The claims are, as is typical for such preparations, both grand and reassuringly vague. The label might also feature a rather stern-looking, heavily bearded gentleman, presumably Dr. Throckmorton himself, looking out at you with an expression of profound medical wisdom and a hint of, "I told you this would work." The ingredients, of course, are not listed in any detail beyond perhaps a tantalizing reference to a carefully guarded blend of rare botanical extracts, pure distillations, and scientifically harmonized essences. This lack of specificity, far from inspiring suspicion, often added to the mystique and perceived potency of Victorian patent medicines. It's the mystery you see that makes it feel so very effective. Or possibly the surprisingly high and equally unlisted alcohol content. You retrieve the bottle. It feels cool and solid in your hand. You hold it up to the faint lamplight filtering into your bedchamber, the dark green glass, obscuring the precise nature of the liquid within. Though you can see it's a rather syrupy, darkish fluid. You uncork it with a soft, satisfying plop. The aroma that wafts forth is complex, a curious mixture of sweet herbal and distinctly alcoholic notes, perhaps with a hint of something vaguely like cherries or aniseed or even a faint, unidentifiable spiciness. It is at least a significant improvement on the olfactory profile of its predecessor, the cod liver oil. This you think might actually be tolerable. It smells less like the bottom of a fishing boat and more like a slightly eccentric elderly aunt's forgotten liquor cabinet. The label instructs you to take 1 tablespoonful as required, but not to exceed 4 such doses in a 24-hour period. A sensible precaution, you suppose, though. You wonder what delightful adventures might ensue if one were to disregard that particular piece of advice. You find a clean tablespoon, not the dreaded cod liver oil spoon, heaven forbid, but a fresh, untainted implement, and carefully pour out a measure of Dr. Throckmorton's celebrated lung tonic. The liquid is thick, a deep ruby, or perhaps a dark, treacly brown, and it clings to the spoon with a certain syrupy reluctance. It looks potent. The label promised to cure everything from a ticklish cough to a general feeling of being under the weather, and possibly even improve one's moral character and handwriting if you read between the very small lines of enthusiastic testimonials. It's the all-in-one miracle you've been vaguely hoping for. You take a moment to prepare yourself. The cayenne pepper gargle was a brief, fiery inferno. The cod liver oil was a prolonged, oily siege. What will Dr. Throckmorton's concoction bring? With a silent commendation of your soul to any passing deities who might be sympathetic to the plight of the self-medicating Victorian, you raise the spoon to your lips and swallow the contents in one determined gulp. The initial taste is surprisingly sweet, a cloying, syrupy sweetness that coats your tongue. This is quickly followed by a wave of strong herbal bitterness, the rare botanical extracts, no doubt making their assertive presence known. And then a definite warmth spreads through your chest, a sensation quite different from the fiery attack of the mustard plaster. This is a more internal, comforting warmth, one that carries with it the distinct, unmistakable flavor of strong spirits. Ah, yes, the scientifically harmonized essences are clearly working their magic, or at least the generous portion of alcohol in which they are suspended is creating a pleasant, if temporary, illusion of well-being. You take a sip. It tastes a bit like old forgotten Christmas cake, steeped in a particularly enthusiastic cough syrup, and a dash of profound optimism. The 19th century was truly the golden age of patent medicines. With minimal regulation and a public eager for cures, manufacturers could make the most extravagant claims for their elixirs, balms, pills, and tonics, often including potent ingredients such as opium in the form of laudanum or paregoric cocaine, newly isolated and initially lauded for its energizing properties, cannabis, and of course, copious amounts of alcohol, all without any requirement for disclosure on the label. These remedies were widely available, heavily advertised in newspapers and magazines with dramatic testimonials, and found a place in almost every household medicine chest. The precise balance between any genuinely active, though often unlisted, misunderstood, or even potentially harmful ingredients, such as these opiates or high concentrations of alcohol, the inert fillers or simple traditional herbal extracts that might also be present, and the undeniably powerful psychological effects of persuasive marketing, elaborate packaging, and a deeply ingrained patient belief in their perceived efficacy, is a complex and continuously debated subject for medical historians and sociologists of health. You, however, are mostly just hoping it will stop your throat from tickling and perhaps make the lingering taste of cod disappear. You sit for a few moments, allowing Dr. Throckmorton's celebrated lung tonic to begin its celebrated work. A pleasant, slightly woozy sensation begins to creep over you. The edges of the room seem a little softer, the flickering lamplight a little more mellow. The scratchiness in your throat, while not entirely gone, feels somewhat distant, less insistent. Your cough, which had been threatening to return, seems to have been temporarily pacified, perhaps, out of sheer surprise at this new, rather potent intervention. You're not entirely sure if your cold is actually better, but you suddenly feel remarkably more cheerful about the rather gloomy wallpaper pattern and have a fleeting, unaccountable urge to compose a short, sentimental poem about the quiet dignity of well-placed onions. The chemist's shop where this marvel was procured, Mr. Pettigrew's establishment on the high street, is a fascinating place in itself. Rows upon rows of mysterious dark glass bottles line its shelves labeled with intriguing Latin names, or equally intriguing proprietary titles like Fenning's Fever Cure, Mother Bailey's Quieting Syrup, a favorite with overwrought infants and their overwrought parents, or the ever-popular Powell's Balsam of Aniseed. Large, ornate porcelain jars, decorated with gilded scrolls and cryptic abbreviations, hold various powders, herbs, and chemicals. The air within Mr. Pettigrew's shop always carries a unique complex aroma, a blend of carbolic soap, dried herbs, pungent tinctures, and the faint sweetish scent of the pastilles and lozenges he keeps in glass jars on the counter. It is a place of both science and mystery, where ancient herbal lore meets the burgeoning, if sometimes misguided, enthusiasms of modern chemistry. You take another small tentative sip from the bottle, just to be sure the curative properties are being given every chance to fully manifest. The warmth spreads again a comforting glow. Your eyelids feel a little heavier. The world takes on a slightly more benign, less scratchy aspect. Perhaps Dr. Throckmorton, with his stern, bearded visage, knew a thing or two after all. The tonic has certainly taken the edge off your immediate discomforts. The raw, fiery memory of the gargle is somewhat soothed, and even the ghostly remnants of the cod liver oil seem to be in retreat. However, as the initial warming effect of the spirits begins to fade, you become aware that a deeper chill still lingers in your extremities. Your feet, in particular, feel like two distant, forgotten blocks of ice. And the general feeling of congestion, that stuffy, head full of wool sensation, hasn't entirely departed. Clearly, while Dr. Throckmorton's cordial has addressed certain symptoms with commendable, if slightly intoxicating, vigor, further measures are required to truly rout this persistent foe. Your thoughts turn to another time honored Victorian strategy for combating chills and drawing out illness: the application of vigorous penetrating heat to the nether regions, specifically your feet. The pleasant wooziness imparted by Dr. Throckmorton's celebrated lung tonic and catarrh cordial begins to gently recede like a warm, syrupy tide, going out, leaving behind the familiar, slightly gritty shores of your actual physical state. While your throat feels somewhat less inclined to erupt in a series of violent, attention-seeking coughs, and the world viewed through the bottom of Dr. Throckmorton's bottle did indeed seem a more cheerful and less drafty place for a while, a deeper, more fundamental chill still clings to your extremities. Your feet, in particular, feel as though they have taken up permanent icy residence in some forgotten Arctic outpost, two distant, disobedient blocks of frozen misery at the far end of your legs. And that general, head full of cotton wool sensation, the unmistakable hallmark of a brewing cold, has not entirely capitulated to the combined forces of onion fumes, cayenne assaults, and mysteriously effective cordials. Clearly, your Victorian domestic health campaign requires another strategic maneuver. If the illness cannot be entirely expelled by direct attack or internal fortification alone, then perhaps it can be coaxed, drawn out, persuaded to relocate from the more vital areas of your head and chest to the less critical, more robustly defensible territory of your feet. This, at least, is the compelling logic behind another time-honored and impressively vigorous Victorian remedy: the scalding hot mustard footbath. The Universal Compendium speaks of it with great enthusiasm, promising that it will promote a healthful circulation, draw down the humors from the oppressed head and lungs, relieve congestion, and induce a most beneficial perspiration. It sounds like precisely the sort of robust, no-nonsense, slightly alarming aquatic adventure your current condition requires. You're about to poach your own feet in the name of health. It's a bold, if somewhat daunting, strategy. First, the acquisition of a suitable quantity of very hot water. This, in a typical Victorian household without the modern convenience of instant hot water taps, is a minor domestic undertaking in itself. You, or perhaps a long-suffering housemaid, if you are fortunate enough to employ such a paragon of domestic resilience, would need to ensure the kitchen range or a hob fire is sufficiently stoked to heat a large kettle or pot of water to a near boiling temperature. Then, this steaming, dangerously hot cargo must be carefully transported, probably in a heavy iron kettle or a large ceramic jug, from the kitchen to your bedchamber. A journey fraught with the peril of scalded shins or unfortunate encounters with errant pets or small children. Once the near boiling water has safely arrived, it must be poured into a capacious foot tub. Perhaps a sturdy, deep earthenware basin, a galvanized tin bath of vaguely coffin-like proportions, or even a dedicated, rather grand-looking porcelain vessel with ornate handles, depending on the sophistication of your household's sanitary arrangements. You then add a judicious amount of cold water to temper the inferno, though the aim is still for a temperature that can best be described as just shy of actively removing the skin. And then, for that extra therapeutic kick, that unmistakable Victorian stamp of medicinal seriousness, you stir in a generous handful of the same Keen's genuine double superfine mustard powder that so recently adorned your chest. The mustard is back this time for your toes. It's a truly versatile little spice of suffering, equally at home on a poultice or in a pedicure, apparently. The pungent, eye-watering aroma of mustard now rises with the billowing steam from the foot tub, creating a truly unique and invigorating atmospheric blend when combined with the lingering onion perfume of your bedchamber. The moment of truth arrives. You sit on the edge of your bed, or perhaps on a low chair conveniently placed beside the steaming mustard yellow foot tub. You gingerly extend one stockinged foot for Victorian propriety, often dictated that one did not simply plunge bare appendages into such things, at least not initially towards the water's surface. The rising steam alone feels incredibly hot, carrying with it that sharp, sinus-clearing, mustardy tang. You dip a toe. It is as suspected approximately the temperature of molten lava, or at least what you imagine molten lava might feel like if it also smelled rather strongly of English mustard. This isn't just a foot bath, it's a trial by very, very hot water. With a deep breath the kind one takes before facing a particularly stern headmaster or an overdue tailor's bill, you summon your Victorian fortitude and plunge both feet into the steaming mustard-infused depths. The initial shock is breathtaking. A searing, almost unbearable heat engulfs your feet and ankles, making you gasp and perhaps emit a small involuntary yelp. Your immediate instinct is to yank them out again with great haste, but the stern pronouncements of the universal compendium echo in your mind. The water should be as hot as can be borne without undue distress. Persevere for 10 to 15 minutes, adding more hot water as it cools, until a thorough warmth is established and perspiration is induced. Undue distress, it seems, is a rather flexible concept in the Victorian pursuit of health. You grit your teeth and endure. After the first minute or two of what feels like active, aggressive poaching, the intense burning pain begins to slowly, grudgingly give way to a deep, penetrating warmth. Your feet, which were previously 2 blocks of ice, are now tingling with 1,000 tiny, fiery needles. You can see them through the murky, yellowish water, turning a rather alarming shade of bright, boiled lobster red. The mustard, no doubt, is contributing its own counter-irritant magic to this thermal assault, stimulating the circulation with gusto. The physiological basis for this deeply ingrained Victorian belief that extremely hot foot baths, particularly those augmented with stimulating substances like mustard, could effectively draw out congestion fever or ill humors from the head or chest, beyond a temporary localized increase in blood circulation to the lower extremities, or the general comforting and undeniably powerful relaxing sensation of warmth, is viewed by modern medical science with considerable if respectful skepticism. However, its palliative and profound psychological effects, the feeling that something dramatic and therefore effective was being done, were widely reported and deeply valued at the time. As you sit there, your feet slowly pickling in their hot mustardy brine, a certain languor begins to steal over you. The intense heat combined with the lingering effects of Dr. Throckmorton's cordial and the general weariness from your cold creates a powerful sense of drowsiness. Your eyelids feel heavy again. The steam rising from the foot tub, carrying its pungent aroma, seems to soften the edges of the room, making the lamplight swim a little. You might lean your head back against the bedstead, your body relaxing into the enforced stillness. Some households might add other ingredients to the footbath for their specific perceived virtues. A handful of bran to soften the skin, some Epsom salts if available, and one was feeling particularly cosmopolitan for their drawing properties, or fragrant herbs like chamomile for soothing or rosemary for invigoration. Yours today is pure, unadulterated, hardcore mustard. After the prescribed 10 or 15 minutes, or perhaps when you can no longer bear the sensation of your feet being gently parboiled, you carefully withdraw them from the tub. They emerge steaming and a truly spectacular shade of crimson, looking as though they have just returned from a very exciting, if slightly hazardous, volcanic holiday. You or your helpful attendant immediately wrap them in a thick, rough, but blessedly dry towel and rub them vigorously until they are thoroughly dry and tingling with an almost painful intensity. Your feet are now the color of a very embarrassed, very well cooked lobster, and they are buzzing with what you sincerely hope is beneficial healing energy, and not just the early warning signs of first-degree burn enthusiasm. The sensation once the initial shock and the toweling ordeal is over is one of profound, radiating warmth. The chill that had settled so deeply in your feet and ankles is gone, replaced by a comfortable, almost throbbing glow that seems to spread slowly up your legs, bringing with it a feeling of general bodily relaxation. There was a belief that one should immediately retire to a warm bed after such a vigorous foot bath, piling in the blankets to seal in the benefits and promote a healthful, cleansing perspiration. You do feel decidedly warmer now and undeniably drowsier. The combination of the mustard plaster's fiery memory, the onion's pungent atmospheric cleansing, the chemist's soothing if spirited draft, and now this vigorous thermal foot assault has left you feeling thoroughly comprehensively and rather exhaustedly doctored. Your feet are tingling, your chest is still radiating a faint residual heat, and your head feels pleasantly muzzy. The scratchiness in your throat, however, while perhaps somewhat subdued by the general systemic shock, might still appreciate one final gentle internal ministration before you fully surrender to the embrace of your waiting pillows. Something warm, something sweet, something to soothe that lingering irritation and pave the way for a truly restful night's sleep. Your feet swaddled now in thick woolen bed socks and still radiating a surprising, almost aggressive lobster red warmth from their recent scalding encounter with the mustard-infused water, are tucked carefully beneath the heavy bedclothes. Your chest, where the ghost of the fiery plaster still tingles with a faint, residual heat, feels somewhat eased, or perhaps just too traumatized to complain further. The air in your bedchamber, though still carrying the faint, battling aromas of militant onion and vindictive vinegar, is at least no longer actively making your eyes stream, thanks to the gradual desensitization of your long-suffering olfactory nerves, or perhaps simply because the onions have given up their most potent, ghostly vapors. You feel thoroughly processed, comprehensively, if somewhat bizarrely doctored. and undeniably overwhelmingly drowsy. The cumulative effect of the day's creeping malaise, followed by the evening's whirlwind tour of robust Victorian domestic remedies. The mustardy inferno, the oniony miasma, fighting the cayenne-laced conflagration in your throat, the fortifying fishiness, the spirited chemist's cordial, and the parboiling of your nether extremities has left you feeling as limp as a piece of overboiled cabbage. Yet despite this profound weariness and the various assaults upon your person, that stubborn, scratchy irritation at the very back of your throat, though perhaps slightly less imperious than before, still makes its presence known with a faint dry tickle. It's a minor complaint, now a mere whisper, compared to the full-throated roar of your earlier discomforts. But it's there a final lingering impediment to the perfect healing slumber you so desperately crave. And so, as you lie propped up against a mountain of plump lace-trimmed pillows, your thoughts, or perhaps the gentle suggestion of a concerned family member hovering solicitously nearby, turn to one last time honored and infinitely more soothing remedy, a warm, sweet, comforting posset, the treacle posset. The very name sounds like something from a nursery rhyme, a gentle old-fashioned concoction designed to soothe and cosset. It is a far cry from the fiery, aggressive interventions you have so bravely endured thus far. This is not a remedy of attack, but one of gentle persuasion, a warm, milky hug in a mug designed to ease a sore throat, calm a tickling cough, and gently usher the sufferer into the welcoming arms of Morpheus. Or, at the very least, to make the journey there taste a little bit nicer. You watch or perhaps just listen with heavy eyelids as the posset is prepared, probably in the relative warmth of the kitchen, or even carefully heated over the small, flickering flame of a spirit lamp in your own bedchamber if you are being particularly well attended to. The ingredients are simple, wholesome, almost childlike. Fresh milk warmed gently in a saucepan, its creamy aroma beginning to fill the air, mingling now with the more assertive scents of your sickroom to create a truly unique olfactory tapestry. To this is added a generous spoonful, or perhaps two, of dark, sticky treacle, that rich, sweet, slightly bitter molasses. That was a common and relatively inexpensive sweetener in Victorian households, a byproduct of the booming sugar refineries that supplied the empire's insatiable sweet tooth. The treacle dissolves slowly into the warm milk, turning it a lovely, comforting cafe au lait color, its deep caramel scent adding another layer of anticipated pleasure. Then come the spices, those precious fragrant powders that speak of distant lands and ancient traditions. A grating of nutmeg, perhaps its warm, aromatic perfume, instantly evoking feelings of comfort and festive cheer. Nutmeg, beyond its culinary uses, was also believed by some to possess mild soporific qualities, a gentle nudge towards drowsiness. A pinch of ground ginger might be added for its warming effect on the stomach, and its ability to dispel wind and melancholy, or perhaps a tiny dash of cinnamon for its sweet, woody fragrance. The actual direct medicinal properties of the core ingredients in a traditional treacle, posset such as the treacle itself, beyond providing simple sugars for energy, or these common household spices like nutmeg or ginger, beyond providing easily digestible calories, a comforting, pervasive warmth, and a temporary, purely mechanical demulcent, soothing and coating effect on an irritated throat, are often viewed by modern nutritionists and pharmacologists with a degree of affectionate skepticism. However, their significant psychological benefits and their well-established role as a vehicle for care comfort and a tangible expression of solicitude were undoubtedly undeniable in the often anxious atmosphere of the Victorian sickroom. This isn't just hot milk and sugar, it's liquid reassurance. Sometimes a traditional posset might even involve curdling the hot milk slightly with a splash of ale or sack a type of sherry, or even the juice of a lemon or orange, which was thought to add to its restorative virtues, though this could result in a slightly more challenging texture for the uninitiated. Tonight, however, yours is a simpler, purely milky affair, focused on sweetness and soothing warmth. There might be a quiet family tradition, a little piece of inherited lore that dictates the posset must be stirred a certain number of times, perhaps widdershins, counterclockwise 3 times, to ward off any lingering ill humors, or to ensure the patient enjoys peaceful, untroubled dreams. You observe this small ritual if it is performed with a sleepy, uncritical acceptance. At this point, you're willing to try almost anything that promises a good night's sleep and doesn't involve mustard or raw onions. Finally, the posset is ready. It is poured steaming gently into your favorite china cup, the one with the slightly chipped handle and the faded painting of a rather pensive-looking spaniel. It is brought to your bedside, its warm, sweet, spicy aroma, a genuinely welcome change from the more aggressive scents that have dominated your evening thus far. You take the cup in your hands, its warmth seeping pleasantly into your chilled fingers. The steam rises carrying that comforting perfume directly to your weary senses. This you think is much more civilized. This is a remedy one can almost look forward to. Forget complex pharmaceuticals and alarming chemical compounds. Sometimes all a suffering Victorian truly needs is a large, reassuringly sweet, and slightly lumpy, hot, milky drink to make the world and one's own throat seem a bit less hostile. You take a small tentative sip. The liquid is hot but not scalding. It is incredibly sweet, the deep, almost smoky flavor of the treacle, perfectly balanced by the creamy milk and the gentle warmth of the spices. It glides down your throat, a smooth coating, instantly soothing balm. The scratchiness, the tickle, the raw, fiery memory of the cayenne gargle, all seem to be momentarily pacified, enveloped in this warm, sweet embrace. It is like a gentle internal blanket, tucking in all the sore, irritated corners, the Victorian equivalent of a sleepy time tea, perhaps but with a significantly higher sugar content and a greater likelihood of giving you some rather interesting dairy-based dreams later on. You continue to sip slowly, savoring the warmth, the sweetness, the sheer uncomplicated comfort of it. Each mouthful is a small act of self-care, a gentle concession to your body's need for soothing and rest. The flickering lamplight casts a soft glow on your face. Your eyelids are growing heavier with each passing moment, and the sounds of the household around you. The creak of a floorboard in the hallway, the distant chime of the grandfather clock striking a late hour, the soft sigh of the wind outside your now firmly closed window. All seem to be receding, becoming part of a distant, sleepy hum. The posset is so comforting, so deeply fundamentally reassuring, it could probably soothe the savage beast, or at least a particularly grumpy Victorian suffering from a rather nasty head cold and a lingering fear of encountering another raw onion. As you near the bottom of the cup, a profound sense of drowsiness, a warm, heavy, irresistible languor washes over you. The world is becoming soft, fuzzy, and invitingly indistinct. Your body feels heavy, relaxed, ready for sleep. Your mind, which has been so active, so preoccupied with remedies and discomforts, is finally beginning to quiet down, to surrender to the approaching peace. You finish the last sweet milky dregs and set the empty cup down on your bedside table with a contented sigh. The warmth from the posset radiates through your chest, a gentle internal glow that complements the still tingling heat in your feet. You feel almost peaceful, almost well, certainly overwhelmingly ready for sleep. You snuggle down further under your heavy blankets, your head sinking into the soft pillows. Yes, this is it. This is the gentle path to oblivion you have been seeking. You close your eyes, a small, sleepy smile on your lips, just about to drift off into what you are certain will be a long, deep, and entirely healing slumber. When the door to your bedchamber creaks open just a fraction, and a well-meaning family member, perhaps your dear spouse, or maybe even the ever-vigilant great-aunt Agatha herself, peers in with an expression of solicitous concern, and one more absolutely essential nighttime remedy held carefully in their hand, just as your eyelids, heavy as leaden curtains, are beginning their final blissful descent into the deep well of slumber, just as the warm, sweet, milky comfort of the treacle posset is lulling your senses into a hazy, dreamlike state. The door to your bedchamber, which you thought had been securely, if softly closed creaks, open just a fraction further. A familiar silhouette, perhaps, that of your ever solicitous spouse, or maybe even the indomitable great Aunt Agatha herself, armed with an expression of unwavering therapeutic determination and one final, absolutely indispensable nighttime remedy, peers into the dimly lit room. Your heart, which had been slowing to a gentle, sleepy rhythm, gives a small, weary flutter of preemptive resignation. Oh dear, it seems your comprehensive tour of Victorian cold cures is not quite over yet. There is, it appears, one more station on this particular Via Dolorosa of domestic doctoring. The figure approaches your bedside, moving with that hushed, reverent tread reserved for sick rooms and libraries. In their hand they carry not a steaming cup, nor a mysterious chemist's bottle, nor even a pungent poultice, but something altogether more domestic. Something that in its normal context is entirely unremarkable, but in its current proposed application strikes you as deeply, wonderfully, and rather alarmingly eccentric. It is, you realize with a dawning sense of bewildered disbelief, a sock, not just any sock, mind you. It appears to be a thick woolen stocking, probably one of your own, retrieved from the depths of the laundry basket or perhaps even warmed specially by the fading embers of the kitchen fire. It is currently emitting a faint but distinctly discernible aroma, a complex bouquet of warm wool, a hint of something vaguely medicinal like camphor or eucalyptus if it has been prepared where, and the undeniable underlying essence of, well, foot. Your neck is now apparently scheduled to sport the latest in high-fashion convalescent wear, the aromatic medicated sock scarf, a must-have accessory for the discerning Victorian invalid. With gentle or perhaps just firm and unarguable insistence, your well-meaning attendant explains in hushed tones the profound and time-honored benefits of this particular application. A warm woolen sock, you're informed, tied snugly around the throat at bedtime is sovereign for drawing out the soreness, keeping the vital warmth in, and preventing the night humors from settling in the glands. It is a remedy passed down through generations, a piece of folk wisdom as sturdy and as scratchy as the wool itself. The persistence of such deeply ingrained folk remedies, often passed down through generations within families and local communities, and existing quite comfortably, if sometimes illogically, alongside more formal medical advice from physicians or the pronouncements of published domestic manuals, and the extent to which they offered genuine physical comfort through simple warmth or other subtle properties, versus primarily fulfilling a powerful psychological need for active intervention and the tangible hands-on expression of care and concern, is an interesting and ongoing aspect of study within Victorian domestic healthcare and what we might now call medical anthropology. You, however, are less concerned with its anthropological significance and more with the imminent prospect of trying to sleep while being gently garroted by your own hosiery. Before you can lodge a coherent, if sleepy, protest, the sock is being carefully or perhaps just efficiently wrapped around your neck. It is surprisingly warm, the wool retaining the heat from its fireside sojourn. This initial warmth is for a fleeting moment not entirely unpleasant against your still tender throat. Then other sensations begin to make themselves known. The wool, while warm, is also undeniably assertively and quite comprehensively itchy. Tiny, invisible wool fibers seem to embark on a gleeful CI exploratory mission into every pore of your neck, each one a microscopic tormentor. You try to adjust it subtly to find a less aggressively abrasive position, but the sock, like a determined fluffy boa constrictor, seems to have settled in for the duration. And then there is the smell. If the sock has indeed been medicated, perhaps with a smear of goose grease, a popular Victorian cure-all for almost everything from chapped lips to creaky cartwheels, or a sprinkle of some pungent dried herb like hops for sleep or mullein for coughs and chest complaints. This aroma now combines with the fundamental underlying scent of sock to create a truly unique olfactory experience, one that is unlikely to be featured in any perfumer's upcoming spring collection. It's earthy, certainly. It's warm, undeniably. It is also, you have to admit, just a little bit peculiar. Forget chicken soup for the soul. This appears to be questionably fragrant, pre-worn hosiery for the pharynx. Your attendant ties the ends of the sock at the back of your neck. Not too tightly, they assure you, just snugly enough to keep the good in and the bad out. You now feel rather like a prize-winning goose being prepared for a county fair, albeit one with a very scratchy, slightly greasy, and distinctly sock-shaped decorative ribbon. You try to offer a weak, appreciative smile, a silent acknowledgement of their loving care, and their unwavering faith in the therapeutic power of repurposed footwear. Your smile probably looks more like a pained grimace. The good news, your throat is undeniably warm. The bad news, it's warm because it's being slowly, gently, and rather itchily suffocated by what feels suspiciously like your missing left hiking sock. You are now fully equipped, it seems, for a night of truly Victorian convalescence. Your chest glows with the memory of mustard. Your room is an aromatic fortress of onion. Your throat has been volcanically scoured. Your system is fortified with fish oil and spirited cordials. Your feet are tingling like two overboiled beets, and your neck is now lovingly embraced by a warm, itchy, and faintly fragrant sock. You are a walking, or rather a lying down testament to the sheer indomitable and occasionally quite baffling ingenuity of 19th century home remedies. Your attendants satisfied that they have now administered every conceivable comfort and cure known to domestic science and ancient folklore, finally bids you a soft good night, extinguishes the lamp, or turns it down to a mere glimmer, and retreats, leaving you alone in the fragrant darkness, with your thoughts and your new, rather unusual neckwear. You try to settle down to find a comfortable position. This proves to be more challenging than anticipated. The sock, while not painfully tight, is undeniably there. It presses against your throat when you swallow. It tickles when you turn your head. Its woolen texture seems to amplify every tiny itch. You try lying on your back, but the knot at the back of your neck digs into the pillow. You try lying on your side, but then the sock seems to bunch up uncomfortably under your ear. You're pretty sure this particular remedy was invented by someone who either had a deep seated pathological vendetta against comfortable sleep, or possibly just owned a very large and unsuccessful sock knitting enterprise and needed a creative new way to move inventory. The warmth, however, is undeniable. A steady, gentle heat radiates from the woolen embrace, and despite the itchiness, despite the faint, peculiar aroma, there is something almost comforting about it. Or perhaps that's just the profound exhaustion finally overwhelming your last vestiges of critical thought. The room is quiet now, save for your own soft breathing and the distant, gentle sigh of the wind outside. The memory of the treacle posset still lingers, a sweet, milky warmth in your belly. Your feet are toasty. Your chest is, well, your chest is still very much aware of itself, but perhaps less aggressively so. And so, cocooned in your blankets, anointed with a pharmacopoeia of Victorian hope, and adorned with your therapeutic sock, you begin once more the slow, uncertain drift towards sleep. The itchiness of the wool becomes a dull background sensation. The faint, strange smell becomes just another part of the night's unique perfume. Your thoughts soften, blur, and begin to dissolve. Perhaps you think as your eyelids finally grow too heavy to lift. Perhaps this greasy, itchy, slightly ridiculous sock is indeed the final magical key to a night of peaceful, healing slumber. Or perhaps you're just too tired to care anymore. Either way, sleep in its own good time is finally slowly beginning to claim you, one itchy, greasy, onion-scented breath at a time, hopefully before the need for something more fortifying, like beef tea, makes itself known in the morning. The night passes in a series of fragmented, itchy, and vaguely sock-scented dreams, punctuated by fits of coughing that seem to echo alarmingly in the onion-perfumed darkness of your bedchamber. When you finally awaken, it is to a gray, listless morning, the light filtering weakly through a gap in your heavy velvet curtains, revealing a room that still bears the faint but unmistakable aromatic signature of last night's comprehensive medicinal campaign. Your throat feels like the inside of a particularly dusty bellows. Your head aches with a dull, persistent throb, and your entire body protests with a chorus of creaks and groans as you attempt to sit up against your mountain of pillows. The heroic remedies of the previous evening, while certainly memorable, do not appear to have achieved a decisive victory over your encroaching catarrh. If anything, you feel a little weaker, a little more thoroughly invalidish than before. It is in this state of fragile convalescence that a gentle knock sounds at your door, followed by the soft entry of a concerned family member, perhaps your spouse, or maybe even the housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, whose expression of profound, if slightly disapproving sympathy is a work of art in itself. They bear a tray, and upon that tray in a delicate china teacup steams the very epitome of Victorian invalid nourishment, a cup of freshly prepared beef tea. For your strength, my dear. They murmur their voice a soothing balm as they place the tray carefully on your bedside table. You must keep up your vital forces. Beef tea. The name itself sounds robust, fortifying, almost aggressively nutritious. The reality as it sits there steaming gently in its pretty rose-patterned cup is often somewhat more ethereal. This isn't the hearty rib-sticking beef stew you might crave on a cold winter's day. Oh no. Victorian beef tea for the invalid was an exercise in subtlety in extracting the very essence of the beef, leaving behind as far as possible any coarse, difficult to digest, solid matter. The preparation itself was a slow, patient ritual. A small piece of lean beef, perhaps from the shin or a similar, less prized cut, would be minced very finely, or sometimes just scored deeply, and then simmered for hours in a tightly covered earthenware jar with a little water and perhaps a pinch of salt. The resulting liquid would then be meticulously strained, often through several layers of muslin, to ensure a perfectly clear amber or pale brownish broth, free from any distracting particles or unsightly globules of fat. The actual significant nutritional contribution of such very clear, meticulously strained beef tea, especially when prepared with minimal quantities of actual meat and with all fats and solids rigorously excluded, versus the more substantial and readily apparent benefits of heartier whole broths or meat-based soups containing rendered gelatin fats and more particulate matter, was a point of some contention and perhaps even misunderstanding, even among Victorian medical professionals and the authors of popular household cookery books. But the belief in its easily digestible, strength-giving properties was deeply, almost religiously ingrained. You gaze at the cup. The liquid within is a pale, translucent brown, and a few tiny iridescent specks of fat, despite the cook's best efforts, float upon its surface like miniature shimmering islands. A faint, undeniably meaty, yet somehow very delicate aroma rises with the steam, a scent that is less roast beef dinner and more the polite, ghostly memory of a cow that once briefly passed through the kitchen. It is, you must admit, a rather more appealing prospect than your last medicinal adventure involving cayenne pepper. This isn't beef tea, you muse. It's more like beef-adjacent water, with a hint of wistful bovine longing. Or perhaps the distilled spirit of a particularly anemic steak, haunting your teacup with quiet dignity. With a sigh that is now less about suffering and more about a general, all-encompassing weariness, you reach for the cup. Its china surface is warm beneath your fingertips, a small, comforting island of heat in the cool morning air of the sickroom. You raise it to your lips and take a small, tentative sip. The taste is mild, very mild. It is predominantly salty, with a faint underlying beefy flavor that is more suggestive than assertive. The texture is thin, watery, easily swallowed. It is, in essence, warm, vaguely savory water. Yet there is something undeniably comforting about it. Perhaps it is the warmth itself, seeping down your still tender throat. Perhaps it is the gentle saltiness, which is said to be restorative. Or perhaps it is simply the profound psychological comfort of being ministered to, of receiving this tangible evidence of care and concern. The Victorians believed this sort of thing could practically raise you from your sickbed. Modern science might suggest it would, at best, make you crave an actual sandwich with some urgency. You continue to sip slowly, cradling the warm cup in your hands. Invalid cookery was a significant and well-documented genre in the Victorian era, with countless recipes published in household manuals and ladies' magazines, all dedicated to preparing light, digestible, and supposedly nourishing fare for those of delicate constitution or those recovering from illness. Beef tea, chicken broth, arrowroot, gruel calves, foot jelly. A surprisingly popular, if texturally challenging, restorative barley water toast. Water, yes, literally water in which a piece of toast had been steeped. These were the staples of the sickroom diet, all designed to sustain the patient without unduly taxing their supposedly weakened digestive systems. The emphasis was often on extracting the essence or juices, rather than on providing robust calorific sustenance. Some particularly elaborate recipes for beef tea even insisted on using only a specific cut of prime beef or on mincing the meat with almost fanatical precision before its long, slow simmering, all in pursuit of this elusive, highly prized essence. As you sip, you might recall your great Aunt Agatha's firm conviction that beef tea is only truly efficacious if consumed from the family's ancestral silver invalid cup, a rather alarming-looking vessel with a peculiar spout that she claims has seen 3 generations of Agnew Smythes through various agues, fevers, and mysterious declines. Yours, thankfully, is just a normal teacup. You're pretty sure this beef tea has fewer calories than the sheer effort it would take to lift Great Aunt Agatha's ancestral silver invalid cup to your lips, especially in your current weakened state. The warmth of the beef tea does, however, seem to spread a gentle, comforting glow through your chest. It's a far cry from the fiery assault of the mustard plaster, but it has its own quiet merit. It feels soothing, nourishing perhaps in a subtle, almost spiritual way, even if its actual contribution to your daily caloric needs is roughly equivalent to that of a single rather small and very surprised pea. You take another sip. Each mouthful is a small conscious act of trying to get better, of coaxing your body back towards health. The room is quiet save for the distant muffled sounds of the household beginning its day, the clatter of pans from the kitchen, the faint cry of a street vendor from the road outside, the rhythmic thumping of someone beating a carpet in a nearby courtyard. You lie back against your pillows, the half-empty cup of beef tea resting on your bedside table. You do feel a little restored, perhaps. The warmth is pleasant. The saltiness has at least taken away the last lingering ghost of yesterday's cod liver oil. But that deep-seated feeling of congestion in your chest, that annoying, rattling little cough that has been your unwelcome companion since last night, still remains. The beef tea, for all its comforting warmth and ancestral reputation, has not quite managed to dislodge it. It seems that while your internal fortitude may have received a gentle, salty nudge, your lungs still require a more direct form of encouragement. Perhaps another topical application, something pungent and penetrating, is in order. The morning wears on a slow gray procession of quiet coughs, occasional sniffles, and the lingering, rather bland aftertaste of restorative beef tea. while the warm, salty broth offered a certain measure of gentle comfort and perhaps a fleeting illusion of returning strength. That deep-seated congestion in your chest, that annoying rattling little companion to your cold, remains stubbornly in residence. It feels as though a small, particularly obstinate badger has taken up lodging in your bronchial tubes and is currently redecorating with large quantities of phlegm. Clearly, while your internal fortitude may have been politely nudged by the beef tea, your lungs still require a more direct mirror. Aromatic form of encouragement to evict their unwelcome tenant. It is time, it seems, for another classic of the Victorian domestic apothecary, the pungent, penetrating, and profoundly fragrant chest rub. Your attentive spouse, or perhaps the ever-resourceful Mrs. Higgins, having noted your persistent, if somewhat weakened cough, now produces a small, sturdy earthenware jar, or a dark glass pot, its label perhaps adorned with an image of a remarkably healthy-looking individual breathing deeply in a field of what appears to be medicinal pine trees. This you recognize with a mixture of resignation and a faint, curious anticipation is the invigorating balsam for afflicted chests, or Dr. Peabody's patent pectoral embrocation, guaranteed to penetrate and soothe. Such preparations were legion in the 19th century, each promising to alleviate coughs, colds, croup bronchitis, and a host of other respiratory woes through the miraculous power of their potent, volatile essences. The rise of commercial enterprise and increasingly sophisticated advertising in the Victorian era saw a veritable explosion in such proprietary remedies, many making bold, often entirely unsubstantiated claims, and frequently relying on common, powerfully scented ingredients derived from newly accessible botanical discoveries or expanded global trade routes, camphor from East Asia, eucalyptus from Australia, menthol, wintergreen, and the like. The jar is opened, and the aroma that issues forth is immediate, powerful, and utterly unmistakable. It is a complex medicinal perfume that speaks of deep forests, icy mountain peaks, and perhaps a slightly overenthusiastic apothecary's experiment. It's a potent blend of camphor, sharp and clean, eucalyptus, cool and penetrating, perhaps a hint of pine or fir needle, and maybe a touch of menthol or oil of wintergreen, all suspended in a base of some sort of animal fat petroleum jelly. A relatively new marvel or a heavy vegetable oil. The smell is so strong, so assertive, it seems to bypass your nostrils entirely and travel directly to your brain, announcing its therapeutic intentions with an almost audible shout. Your chest is about to become the fragrant epicenter of a Victorian aromatherapy experiment, gone slightly, though hopefully beneficially, rogue. This isn't just a chest rub. It's a full olfactory assault designed to politely but firmly request that your cough pack its bags and seek alternative accommodation. You are gently persuaded to sit up further against your pillows, and the front of your nightshirt is unbuttoned, exposing your chest. Still faintly pink and tender from yesterday's mustard plaster adventure to the cool morning air of the bedchamber. A generous dollop of the thick, greasy, and powerfully scented unguent is scooped from the jar, perhaps with a clean finger or a small, smooth wooden spatula. It looks like a solidified cloud of medicinal fog, or perhaps the congealed ectoplasm of a particularly health-conscious ghost. Then the application begins. A pair of firm, capable hands, Your spouse's, perhaps, or Mrs. Higgins's, if she is particularly dedicated to her nursing duties, begins to rub the balsam vigorously onto your chest and perhaps also onto your back and throat. The initial sensation is one of surprising coolness as the ointment makes contact with your skin, but this is quickly followed by a rapidly developing intense warmth, a tingling, almost burning feeling that spreads across the treated area. It's not as aggressively fiery as the mustard plaster, but it is a definite penetrating heat accompanied by that overwhelming, opening aroma. The friction of the rubbing itself adds to the sensation, stimulating the skin, supposedly helping the virtues of the embrocation to penetrate deeply into the afflicted lungs. You are instructed to breathe deeply to inhale the powerful vapors, which are believed to loosen phlegm, clear the bronchial passages, and soothe inflamed tissues. You comply, taking slow, deliberate breaths, and the potent, minty, camphorous, piney fumes do indeed seem to fill your sinuses, your throat, and your lungs with a cool, tingling, almost anesthetizing sensation. Whether the primary therapeutic benefit of these powerfully aromatic Victorian chest rubs was due to the direct physiological action of their volatile organic compounds on the bronchial passages when inhaled, a localized counter-irritant effect on the skin, thereby diverting attention from deeper discomfort, much like the plasters or the significant psychological comfort and reassurance derived from the potent aroma. The distinct sensation of warmth and the caring ritual of hands-on application is still a subject of active discussion and consideration among medical historians and pharmacologists. For you at this moment, it mostly just feels very, very strong, and you smell like a pine forest that's had a rather unfortunate and prolonged argument with a peppermint stick, possibly in the vicinity of an angry bear that has recently bathed in eucalyptus oil. Some believe that the stronger the smell of such a liniment and the more intense the sensation on the skin, the more effective it was likely to be. There might even be a particular, almost ritualistic pattern to thrubbing, perhaps firm circular motions or long sweeping strokes, always moving upwards to lift the congestion. Afterwards, it was common practice to cover the freshly anointed chest with a piece of warm flannel or wool, a chest protector, to keep the area warm and presumably to prevent the potent vapors from escaping too quickly and thus diminishing their efficacy, and also to prevent the greasy ointment from staining your bedclothes too catastrophically. You are now essentially a human potpourri, a walking, breathing, if slightly rattly sachet of Victorian medicinal herbs and invigorating unguents. The sensation on your skin is now a steady, radiating warmth, bordering on a pleasant, low-level burn. The aroma, while still powerful, has become slightly less overwhelming as you grow accustomed to it, or perhaps as your olfactory senses have simply waved a tiny white flag of surrender. You do feel perhaps that your breathing is a little easier. The congestion in your chest seems looser, less tight. Or is that just the power of suggestion? The sheer force of will emanating from your attendant, who is now regarding your gleaming, fragrant chest with an air of profound, therapeutic satisfaction. It's hard to say, but something certainly feels different. You feel thoroughly medicated. Vapors are undoubtedly being inhaled. Circulation is almost certainly being stimulated, and your ability to ever again approach a pine tree or a peppermint candy without a vague sense of medicinal dread is probably now permanently compromised. You lie back against your pillows, a human beacon of camphorous eucalyptus laden hope. The warmth on your chest is actually quite comforting now, a steady, deep heat that seems to penetrate to your very bones. The room is filled with the clean, sharp medicinal scent, a scent that in the Victorian mind was inextricably linked with healing, with cleanliness, with the routing of disease. You feel cocooned in this aromatic warmth, a feeling of being actively, if somewhat pungently, cared for. The lingering cough, when it does occasionally make an appearance, seems a little less harsh, a little less rattling. Perhaps this particular remedy, for all its olfactory assertiveness, is indeed doing some good. Just as you are beginning to settle into this warm, fragrant, and slightly greasy state of being, just as you are contemplating the possibility of drifting off into a soothing, mentholated doze, your attentive family member, still brimming with theories of good nursing and domestic hygiene, glances towards the firmly closed window of your bedchamber with a new, determined glint in their eye. The air in here, they might pronounce, despite the onions and the current chest rub effusions, is becoming stagnant, close, and depleted of its vital properties. What is clearly needed now, they declare with unshakable conviction, is a thorough bracing and utterly healthful change of atmosphere. Your brief moment of aromatic, greasy, and relatively warm peace cocooned in the afterglow of Dr. Peabody's patent pectoral embrocation is alas destined to be short-lived. Just as you are beginning to drift into a state of what might almost be described as comfortable, camphor-scented languor, your attentive family member, their brow furrowed with the earnest conviction of one who has thoroughly imbibed the latest theories on domestic hygiene, casts a critical eye around your bedchamber. The air they pronounce with a certain grim finality, despite the valiant efforts of the strategically deployed onions and the currently radiating chest rub, is becoming stagnant. It is close. It is, they assert, quite possibly depleted of its vital health-giving properties and becoming dangerously thick with the subtle effluvia of the sickroom. What is clearly, urgently, and undeniably required, they declare, is a thorough bracing and utterly healthful change of atmosphere via the immediate and vigorous application of fresh outdoor air. Before you can muster a sufficiently robust, if somewhat muffled and medicinally scented protest, the sashes of your bedroom window, or perhaps even both windows, if you are particularly unfortunate, are being thrust upwards with a determined creak and a decisive rattle. A gust of cold, damp, and aggressively fresh morning air immediately sweeps into the room like an invading army, bringing with it the distinct earthy smell of wet gardens, the distant rumble of iron-shod cartwheels on the cobbled street below, and a temperature drop that feels roughly equivalent to being instantly transported from your cozy, if somewhat pungent, sickbed to a windswept ice floe in the North Atlantic. Your room has now been dramatically upgraded from fragrant Victorian sickbay with hints of onion and eucalyptus to Antarctic wind tunnel with slightly more oppressive wallpaper. The shock of this sudden influx of frigid air upon your warm, liniment-coated skin is profound. Every exposed surface, your face, your hands, if they have escaped the confines of your blankets, even the tip of your nose, is instantly assaulted by the chill. Gooseflesh erupts with an almost audible pop. Your earlier gentle shivers are instantly replaced by a series of more vigorous, uncontrollable spasms that threaten to dislodge your carefully arranged pillows and possibly even the very teeth from your head. This isn't just fresh air, this is a direct personal and rather brutal affront from the entire concept of outside. The Victorian era, particularly its latter half, was a time of great and often contradictory anxieties and enthusiasms regarding ventilation and air quality. The lingering influence of miasma theory, which held that diseases like cholera, typhoid, and even the common cold were caused by bad air or noxious vapors rising from decaying organic matter or stagnant environments, led to an almost obsessive focus on ensuring a constant flow of fresh air through dwellings, hospitals, and sick rooms. Influential figures like Florence Nightingale championed the importance of good ventilation in hospital wards, and her principles were widely adopted, sometimes with more enthusiasm than nuanced understanding into domestic sick nursing practices. The idea was to continually flush out the vitiated air of the sick room, replacing it with the supposedly pure, life giving air from outdoors. The precise balance that Victorian domestic advisors and medical practitioners sought to strike between ensuring this adequate ventilation to dispel supposed miasmas and prevent the much feared stagnation of air within the confines of the sick room versus the very real and often acutely felt dangers of catching a chill, which was widely believed to lead to more serious illness, a relapse, or the dreaded inflammation of the lungs, often depended heavily on the individual physician's prevailing theories, deeply ingrained domestic customs, the specific ailment being treated, and the perceived robustness or delicacy of the unfortunate patient. You currently are feeling decidedly on the delicate and about to develop an inflammation of everything end of that particular spectrum. Your well meaning attendant, however, beams with satisfaction as the cold air swirls invigoratingly for them, at least around the room, ruffling the pages of the Universal Compendium on your bedside table and causing the heavy velvet curtains to billow inwards like the sails of a ship caught in a rather unseasonable squall. There, they exclaim with the triumphant air of one who has just single-handedly vanquished a legion of invisible miasmatic demons. Much better. One can already feel the air becoming purer, can one not? You manage a weak, chattering nod, which could be interpreted as agreement, or possibly just as an advanced stage of hypothermic seizure. You're pretty sure Florence Nightingale, for all her undoubtedly good intentions and revolutionary nursing reforms, never had to personally endure this particular brand of healthful ventilation, whilst simultaneously smelling strongly of onions, mustard, and a proprietary blend of camphor and eucalyptus, and also trying to recover from a simple head cold. You try to burrow deeper under your pile of heavy woolen blankets and perhaps a thick eiderdown quilt, creating a small, stuffy, but at least relatively less Arctic personal microclimate. The problem is, the air under the blankets still carries the potent, penetrating aroma of your recent chest rub application, and breathing too deeply of these concentrated fumes in such an enclosed space makes your eyes water almost as much as the onions did. It's a true Victorian dilemma. Suffocate in a warm, greasy, medicated fug, or freeze to death in a blast of theoretically pure but undeniably glacial fresh air. The sounds of the outside world, previously muffled by the closed window and your own internal chorus of sniffles and coughs, now flood into the room with startling clarity. You can hear the clatter of milk pails from the dairy cart down the street, the shrill cry of a costermonger selling winkles or watercress, the rumble of a passing drayman's wagon, and the surprisingly loud and opinionated squawking of a flock of pigeons who have apparently taken up residence on your window ledge and are now loudly debating the merits of entering your newly ventilated, if still rather onion scented apartment. It is a vibrant, bustling symphony of urban morning life, and it all feels incredibly aggressively loud. You recall reading in a popular ladies' journal about the art of airing a sickroom. It often involves specific, carefully prescribed times of day, perhaps for a brief bracing 10 minutes in the mid morning, when the sun, if present, was at its highest, and the air supposedly at its purest, and then again for another short interval before dusk. It was not generally recommended to leave the windows of an invalid's chamber wide open for extended periods in damp, chilly weather, for fear of precisely the relapse you are currently envisioning for yourself. There might also have been suggestions for using muslin screens over the open window in warmer weather to filter the air and keep out dust and insects, though such a flimsy barrier would offer little defense against the current determined onslaught of cold, damp British morning air. Some households even held the belief that night air was particularly pernicious and should be avoided at all costs, a concept that sits rather ironically with your previous experiences on the castle battlements in another story, but that good morning air, even if it felt like it had been imported directly from the Arctic, was considered purifying and restorative. The miasmas you sincerely hope are indeed fleeing in terror from this sudden chilly atmospheric purge. Unfortunately, it feels as though every last vestige of your own body, heat along with any lingering sense of comfort or well-being, is fleeing right along with them. You can feel the cold seeping into the mattress beneath you, into the pillows behind your head. The warmth from the now distant memory of the hot footbath and the treacle posset feels like a forgotten dream from another lifetime. Your chest, despite its fragrant coating of Dr. Peabody's pectoral embrocation, begins to feel tight again, and that annoying little tickle in your throat, which had been temporarily subdued, starts to make a tentative, then a more assertive comeback, threatening to erupt into a fresh bout of coughing that will no doubt be amplified by the cold, damp air you are now obliged to inhale. This, you think with a shiver that is only partly due to the cold, is surely the point at which the cure becomes significantly more unpleasant than the disease. You are now cold, damp, shivering, surrounded by the lingering ghosts of aggressive vegetables and pungent ointments, and all in the name of vanquishing a simple common cold. As you lie there, huddling beneath your inadequate blankets, listening to the wind whistle a merry tune through your now healthfully ventilated bedchamber, you begin to wonder if perhaps a more decisive form of intervention might be warranted. Something to quell this cough, to soothe this irritation, something to simply make the world go away for a few blessed, peaceful hours. You lie shivering beneath your mountain of inadequate bedclothes, the healthful ventilation from the still open window, a testament to Victorian conviction over comfort. swirling the frigid morning air around your bedchamber like an invisible icy poltergeist. Your chest, despite its fragrant coating of Dr. Peabody's pectoral embrocation, still feels tight, and that irritating little cough, which had been briefly subdued, has now returned with a renewed wheezing vigor, each convulsion sending a fresh wave of goose flesh rippling across your already chilled skin. The beef tea, the mustard plaster, the onions, the cayenne gargle, even Dr. Throckmorton's spirited cordial, they have all played their part in this grand domestic drama of battling the common cold. Yet, the cold itself, that stubborn, unglamorous little ailment, seems determined to prolong its unwelcome visit. You are tired. You are cold. You are thoroughly, comprehensively miserable. And you desperately, profoundly wish for it all to just stop for a few blessed hours at least. It is in this moment of weary desperation when your fortitude is at its lowest ebb and your tolerance for further invigorating or purifying remedies has reached its absolute limit, that your gaze flickering around the familiar objects on your cluttered bedside table might fall upon a small, dark, and rather unassuming little bottle tucked away at the back, almost hidden behind a silver-backed hairbrush and a slightly dusty volume of sentimental poetry. This is not one of the brightly labeled, boisterously advertised patent medicines. This one is more discreet, its label perhaps handwritten by the chemist, or bearing a simple, unadorned printed title, Cough Cordial, or Soothing Linctus, or even with a certain archaic honesty, Tincture of Opium Camphorated, for obstinate coughs and restlessness. This, you know, is the remedy of last resort, the one that promises not so much a cure, but a blessed temporary cessation of hostilities. The whispers of laudanum, that potent poppy-derived panacea, have reached even your most fevered imaginings of relief. Opium in its various preparations. Laudanum, a simple alcoholic tincture of opium paregoric, a camphorated tincture, often sweetened and flavored, or as a key ingredient in countless proprietary soothing syrups, cough mixtures, and pain relievers, was a ubiquitous and entirely legal component of the Victorian medicine chest. It was readily available from any chemist, without prescription, astonishingly inexpensive, and widely used by people of all social classes for an enormous range of ailments: pain of any kind, coughs, diarrhea, nerves, insomnia, teething troubles in infants, and as a general calmative in a world that, despite its outward appearance of starched propriety, was often fraught with anxiety, discomfort, and sudden inexplicable illness. The extent to which Victorian society across its different strata truly recognized and grappled with the pervasive and insidious addictive potential of such casually and regularly used opiate-based remedies for a wide array of everyday ailments and discomforts versus the period's general cultural acceptance of them as legitimate, often indispensable, and even divinely provided medicines for the alleviation of pain and human suffering is a complex and continuously debated subject for medical, social, and pharmaceutical historians. For you right now, it simply represents the promise of peace, with a hand that trembles slightly, partly from cold and partly from a mixture of anticipation and a faint unacknowledged trepidation. You reach for the little dark bottle. It feels cool and smooth in your palm. The liquid within is dark, perhaps a deep reddish brown or almost black, and slightly viscous. You uncork it carefully. The aroma that drifts out is unique, a strange, not entirely unpleasant combination of sweet alcoholic, and a faintly bitter, almost earthy or smoky undertone that is characteristic of the poppy's potent gift. It might be masked with other scents like anise, licorice, or peppermint, but that underlying unmistakable opiate signature, is there a quiet promise of oblivion? The label, if it offers any instructions at all beyond the name of the preparation, will likely recommend a dosage measured in drops. 5 to 10 drops for an adult upon a lump of sugar, or in a little sweetened water to be repeated in 3 to 4 hours if the cough persists. These were potent concentrations, and the line between a therapeutic dose and something altogether more profound or even dangerous could be a fine one, especially with repeated use. You are seeking only temporary relief, a brief respite from the tyranny of your own rebellious respiratory system. You find a teaspoon in a small glass. With painstaking care, you attempt to measure out a few drops from the bottle. The dark, syrupy liquid emerges slowly, reluctantly. 1 drop, 2, 3. Perhaps you add a fourth for good measure, your cough, giving a particularly violent punctuating spasm just at that moment, as if to endorse your decision for a slightly more robust application. You add a little water from the carafe by your bed, swirling the glass gently. The mixture is a murky brownish color. It does not look particularly appetizing, but then neither did the cod liver oil, and this at least comes with a far more seductive promise than mere fortification. This isn't just a cough syrup. It's a make the world, and particularly this blasted cold, go away for a little while elixir. You take a moment then, lift the glass to your lips. The taste is initially sweet, perhaps, from added sugar or flavorings in the cordial, but this is quickly followed by a pronounced bitterness and that distinctive, slightly metallic opiate flavor, all carried on a wave of alcoholic warmth. It is not pleasant, not in the way the treacle posset was pleasant, but it is not actively repulsive either. It is simply medicinal, purposeful. You swallow it down. For a few minutes, nothing seems to happen. The cold air still swirls in from the open window. Your chest still aches. Your throat still tickles. You begin to wonder if this, too, like so many of the other remedies, is more promise than performance. But then, slowly, subtly, a change begins to creep over you. It starts as a gentle warmth, spreading outwards from your stomach, a warmth that has nothing to do with mustard plasters or hot footbaths, but is deeper, more pervasive, more comforting. The label might as well have said caution, may cause extreme coziness, a profound and delightful indifference to your current physical predicament, and a sudden overwhelming desire to nap for approximately 1 geological epoch. The insistent nagging tickle in your throat begins to lessen, to recede. Your cough, which had been a constant irritating companion, becomes less frequent, less forceful, then almost hesitant, as if it's forgetting what it was supposed to be doing. The aches in your limbs, the chill in your bones, the general misery of your physical state, they don't exactly disappear, but they seem to become more distant, muted, as if they are happening to someone else. Someone you are observing with a sort of calm, detached sympathy from a very comfortable, very fluffy cloud. You're entering the fuzzy edges phase of your Victorian cold care experience. A profound sense of drowsiness begins to wash over you, a heavy, warm, irresistible wave. Your eyelids, which you had been struggling to keep open now, feel impossibly heavy. The sounds of the room, the wind, the distant street noises, even the chirping of that one ridiculously optimistic bird outside your window seem to grow fainter to recede into a soft, blurred hum. The patterns on the wallpaper, which earlier seemed merely gloomy or overly elaborate, now take on a certain gentle swimming quality that is not entirely unpleasant. The world is softening, dissolving, losing its sharp, uncomfortable edges. Side effects of this particular remedy may include a temporary but profound inability to care about miasmas, a fleeting belief that the lumps in your straw palate are actually surprisingly comfortable, and really good sleep, possibly with some rather interesting dreams. You snuggle deeper under your blankets, the itchy woolen sock around your neck, now feeling almost like a comforting embrace. Or perhaps you've just lost all sensation in that area. The memory of the onions, the mustard, the cayenne, the cod liver oil, all the slings and arrows of your outrageous Victorian fortune begin to fade into a distant, unimportant haze. There is only this growing warmth, this deepening peace, this overwhelming, delicious, poppy-induced languor. Your breathing becomes slow and even. Your mind, finally released from its anxious preoccupation with your symptoms, drifts free, untethered into a sea of soft, formless, and deeply inviting oblivion. The whispers of laudanum have sung their potent ancient lullaby, and you are at long last falling into a heavy, profound, and mercifully symptom-free, if perhaps slightly strange and dream-filled sleep. You awaken slowly, drifting up from a deep, unusually profound, and somewhat vaguely dream-filled slumber, like a diver ascending from the strange, silent depths of a poppy seed-infused sea. The first sensation is one of profound stillness, a heavy, languid peace that feels utterly unfamiliar after the recent whirlwind of medicinal assaults and catarrhal discomforts. The insistent tickle in your throat is quiet. The rattling congestion in your chest seems subdued. The violent urge to sneeze that had punctuated your previous existence with such alarming regularity appears to have taken a holiday. It is a most peculiar and not entirely unwelcome state of being. The gray morning light, or perhaps it is now early afternoon, filters softly through your still open window, the one that was so enthusiastically flung wide for healthful ventilation, and subsequently transformed your bedchamber into a miniature Arctic wind tunnel. The air, however, feels less bitingly cold now, or perhaps the laudanum-laced cordial has simply rendered your nerve endings temporarily indifferent to its temperature. You lie there for a long moment, nestled deep within your fortress of pillows and blankets, trying to assess your current physical inventory. Your head feels a little muzzy, your thoughts slow and somewhat syrupy, as if they are wading through treacle. This, you suspect, is the lingering farewell gift from Dr. Throckmorton's celebrated and indeed rather potent cough cordial. But beneath that faint opiate haze, there's an undeniable, almost miraculous absence of acute misery. You cautiously take a deeper breath. Your lungs expand with a new surprising ease, without that familiar ominous rattle or the immediate provocation of a coughing fit. You swallow. Your throat, while perhaps still a little tender from its fiery encounter with the cayenne gargle, no longer feels like it's lined with particularly abrasive sandpaper. Could it be? Could this simple, common, yet stubbornly persistent cold actually be retreating? It seems almost too good to be true. After the litany of rather dramatic and often deeply unpleasant remedies you have so bravely, if somewhat reluctantly, endured. You've survived the cold, and more impressively, you've survived the cures. A day or perhaps even two might have passed in this state of medicated repose and gradual, almost imperceptible improvement. The average duration of a common cold in the Victorian era and how significantly its debilitating effects actually impacted daily life work, attendance, and overall productivity, particularly among the working classes who often had far less access to the luxury of prolonged periods of rest, adequate if sometimes peculiar nourishment, or the dubious benefits of extensive domestic nursing, involving greasy socks and onion-scented air, is difficult to precisely chart from historical records alone, though anecdotal evidence from diaries and letters suggests it was a frequent, unwelcome, and often surprisingly lengthy disruption to the normal course of life. Now, in the quiet aftermath of the main battle, you enter the gentle, slightly tedious phase of convalescence. You are still weak, certainly. Any attempt to sit up too quickly results in a moment of mild dizziness, and the thought of engaging in any strenuous activity, such as, for instance, lifting the universal compendium of domestic economy without assistance, seems laughably ambitious. But the acute symptoms, the ones that made you contemplate the relative merits of spontaneous combustion versus another dose of cod liver oil, have largely receded. You are now in the mostly just rather tired and a bit sniffly, with a lingering suspicion that your bedclothes smell faintly of a forgotten salad bar phase of your illness, which is by any measure a vast improvement. Your days for now are a slow, quiet rhythm of rest, punctuated by the arrival of strengthening invalid fare. The robust beef tea makes a reappearance, of course, still tasting mostly of warm salt and wistful bovine memories. But it might now be supplemented by other delicacies from the Victorian sickroom cookbook. Perhaps a small bowl of arrowroot pudding, a bland, translucent, easily digestible starch that was considered wonderfully soothing for delicate stomachs, or a trembling pale yellow portion of calf's foot jelly, its wobbly consistency and faint, meaty flavor believed to be immensely restorative due to its gelatinous nature, though its preparation involved the rather alarming boiling of actual calves' feet. For many hours, a culinary adventure best left to the stoic confines of the kitchen. Convalescence in the Victorian mind was all about building up the strength, restoring the vital humors, and generally coaxing the enfeebled system back to a state of robust, productive, and morally upright health, usually with things that were either very bland or very, very strange. You might spend your hours propped up in bed, wrapped in a multitude of shawls and knitted comforters, perhaps reading a suitably calming and morally uplifting book. Maybe a collection of sentimental poetry by Mrs. Hemans, or a novel by Miss Charlotte M. Yonge, detailing the pious struggles and ultimate virtuous triumphs of a particularly good, if somewhat dull, family. The more sensational installments of Mr. Dickens might be deemed a little too exciting for your current delicate state, or you might simply doze, drifting in and out of a light, hazy sleep, the sounds of the household a distant, comforting murmur. The world for a little while is kept at bay. Your primary responsibilities now are to rest, to sip your beef tea with a convincing display of invalid gratitude, and to not expire from sheer boredom. You reflect with a faint, weary amusement on the gauntlet of remedies you have recently run. The fiery embrace of the mustard plaster, still a faint pink memory on your chest. The tear-inducing pungency of the bedside onions, whose lingering ghost still occasionally tickles your nostrils if the wind blows in a certain direction. The volcanic inferno of the cayenne gargle, which has left your throat with a newfound respect for blandness. The oily horror of the cod liver oil, whose aftertaste you suspect may be a permanent hereditary condition. The mysterious spirited comfort of Dr. Throckmorthorpe's, or was it Throckmorton's, celebrated cordial, which certainly made the wallpaper more interesting for a while. And of course, the unforgettable, itchy, greasy, and surprisingly warm embrace of the therapeutic sock. It was, you must admit, quite an ordeal. And yet, here you are slowly, undeniably, on the mend. Perhaps there was some method in the madness after all. Or perhaps your constitution is simply more resilient than you gave it credit for, capable of surviving not only the cold, but also the enthusiastic, if somewhat misguided, attempts to cure it. As your strength gradually returns, you might venture out of bed for short periods, perhaps, to sit by the window, now only slightly ajar, to prevent any further unhealthful chills, while still allowing a modicum of beneficial air circulation, and watch the muted comings and goings in the street below. The world seen through the slightly hazy lens of recent illness looks both familiar and subtly changed. Your body is slowly evicting the last lingering remnants of the cold, and possibly also the faint spectral aroma of that particularly enthusiastic chest rub. The appetite, that fickle friend, begins to make a more assertive return, no longer satisfied with mere beef tea and arrowroot. You might find yourself actually craving something with a little more substance, a little more flavor. Perhaps a piece of dry toast with a scraping of butter, or even daringly a soft-boiled egg. These are all good signs, indicators that nature, in its own slow, inexorable way, is completing the healing process. That all the mustard onions and mysterious cordials could only attempt to initiate, or at best accompany with great aromatic fanfare. You have, it seems, weathered the storm. The memory of those bizarre and often uncomfortable remedies now brings a faint sleepy smile to your lips. The common cold, that surprisingly simple, yet profoundly annoying little ailment, is finally slowly but surely taking its leave. And so, as the last vestiges of your Victorian cold gently fade into memory like the faint, lingering scent of camphor in a long-closed sickroom, you find yourself enveloped in a profound sense of quiet, restorative peace. The world outside your window, with its clatter and its calls, its demands and its duties, seems to recede, to soften its edges, blurred by the gentle haze of returning wellness and the undeniable call of deep, healing rest. Let the memory of those curious, sometimes alarming, but always well-intentioned remedies, the fiery plasters, the pungent onions, the volcanic gargles, the oily fortifications, the spirited cordials, the scalding footbaths, the milky possets, the itchy socks, the bland beef teas, the aromatic rubs, the bracing draughts, and even the potent whispers of laudanum, all dissolve now into a gentle, humorous, and ultimately soothing backdrop to your own journey towards slumber. Feel the lingering weakness in your limbs give way to a pleasant, heavy languor. Your breathing is easy now, deep, and even each exhalation a quiet release. Each inhalation a soft embrace of returning strength and profound tranquility. The trials of your Victorian cold are over. There is nothing left now but to surrender to the gentle, comforting embrace of a truly deep, truly peaceful, and wonderfully uncomplicated sleep.